Good morning and welcome to your most authoritative news analysis show, Newsfile. We're live on Joy News. We're on Joy 99.7 FM and affiliates across the country, far and near. We're on myjoyonline.com and every social media platform you know. On DSTV is channel 421, GoTV is 144. In this edition, we focus on two main thematic areas. The passage of the Proper Human, Sexual and Family Values Bill by Parliament just on Wednesday last week, and ask whether we are seeking to uphold Ghana's moral values and court global damnation, or is it a simple retrogressive act? And then we focus secondly on President Akufo-Addo's penultimate address, accounting for his stewardship as our leader. In his words, we stumbled, but we are rising again. We were bruised, but we are healing. We have recovered our footing. We have dusted ourselves off, and now we face tomorrow with confidence. But is that our true state as a nation? It's an honest account, or we are simply playing the proverbial ostrich amidst the glaring doom? That's the key question today. It is my pleasure to sit in for Samson Ladia Yenene, your regular host who is on a short break to participate in the 2024 AGLN Aspen Institute Globalization Program in Abu Dhabi. He says to tell you to be kind to me as I sit in for him. This is Newsfile, brought to you by Bank of Africa, as strong as a group, as close as a partner. Also brought to you by MTN, everywhere you go. Ashesi University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Also by Robert & Sons Optical Services, your comprehensive eye care service provider for 33 years plus. My Way, dial *163# on MTN to join My Way today. Syntex tanks, a year strong, a year tough. Also by Flamingo Paints, simply superior. I am Emefa Apawu, and my guest to deal with the very vexed matters for the very first segment, which will focus heavily on the Proper Human, Sexual and Family Values Bill, are Professor Audrey Gajekpo, the Department of Communication Studies and Chairperson, Center for Democratic Development, CDD Ghana, also represents the 18 civil society groups against this particular bill. We'll also have the spokesperson for the National Chief Imam, Sheikh Karimi Al-Shaibu, join me via Zoom. Professor Godfred Bokping, he is a professor of finance and an economist, University of Ghana. And in the studios with me, joining me shortly, is Samuel Nate George, MP Ningo Pram. He's also the Deputy Ranking Member, Communications Committee of Parliament, also a member of the Public Accounts Committee of Parliament. Then also joining me in the studios will be Joseph Dundiok Pemka, Esquire. He's a former Deputy Attorney General and Minister for Justice and former MP Timpani. For our second theme, which is Sona 2024, the two friends from the two main political parties will stay with me in the studio, and also Professor Bokping will stay with us while we welcome Dr. Theo Champong. He's an economist and political risk analyst. Professor Kwesi Ening, a security consultant, will also focus heavily on the security issues as put out there by President Akufo-Addo. Kwame Sapong-Isiedu is a D&D fellow on public health at CDD Ghana, a pharmacist, member of the Royal Pharmaceutical Society of Great Britain, also a member of the Pharmaceutical Society of Ghana and the Institute of Pharmacy Management International. On the issue about corruption and why the president did not touch on it, Mary Awilanada is Executive Director, Ghana Integrity Initiative, is vexed about that and will join us. And Ben Boachi is Executive Director, Africa Center for Energy Policy, will be focusing on the energy sector and the accounts given so far as against the real situation. Then my colleague Tahiru Fento, Joy Sports, will focus on our quest to save Ghana football through a presidential policy on scouting, grooming, and developing talent at the grassroots level. Of course, it's a packed show with a lot of room for your contribution. So send them in with the hashtag Newsfile. I am Emefa Apawu. We'll take a quick break. We're right back. Please stay with me. Welcome back to the very first Ghana Month edition of Newsfile for the month of March. We start with the bill that has all eyes on Ghana, my motherland. That's the Proper Human, Sexual and Family Values Bill. I call it the PHSFV bill. I will do all to avoid calling it the anti-gay bill because the proponents insist it is not. I'll get to my guest shortly, but let's just put everything in perspective in terms of what happened that day on Wednesday. We'll hear from the majority leader, Alexander Afenyo-Marking, and the concerns he raised about jail terms for such persons when we are seeking to actually correct, and then also the Right Honourable Alban Bagbing, the Speaker of Parliament. We can watch that, then we get talking.
I humbly pray that you grant me leave, which leave would allow me to formally file some amendments I have to this bill. But the sponsors themselves again and again filed amendments. Please, let's be fair. The sponsors themselves...
Leader, ignore them and make your point.
The sponsors themselves again and again filed amendments. Please hear me. Please accommodate me. I'm not the only one who is coming with an application for second consideration. This is the third time that the sponsors themselves have come to this house for second consideration. The third time. Twice on notice, one without notice. So, Mr. Speaker, it wouldn't be out of place to pray, to be accommodated, to enable me file my amendments. Mr. Speaker, I believe that instead of going viva voce, instead of using the extempore approach, if I file and its same appear on the other paper, and members are able to read, they will get a sense of my point. And then we'll be able to have a law that all of us would appreciate its import. Mr. Speaker, should we hurriedly suspend the rules and say that we are past it?
Speaker, our colleague, the majority leader, just asked for a prayer. In the book of Ecclesiastes chapter 3, the Bible says that to everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under the heaven. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 1. And I believe the time for the third reading of this bill is now. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I'm going to put the question that the motion has been moved and seconded, and I left it for your consideration. You've made your point, and it's not for me to take the decision, it's for the House to take the decision. And so I put the question. Those in favor that the Human Sexual Rights and Family Values Bill 2021 be taken through the third reading, say aye. Aye. Those against, say no. Honorable members, the ayes have it. The Human Sexual Rights and Family Values Bill 2021 is read the third time and passed.
That's how it went down in Parliament on Wednesday, and my guests are already. Professor Audrey Gajepo is on Zoom, Department of Communication Studies and Chairperson, Center for CDD. Sheikh Arimiya Shaibu, spokesperson, National Chief Imam, also on Zoom. Professor Godfred Bokping is a professor of finance and an economist, University of Ghana. Samuel Nate George, MP, Ningo Pram Pram, Deputy Ranking Member, Communications Committee of Parliament, and member of the Public Accounts Committee, joins me in studio. And so has Joseph Dindiok Wemka Esquire, is a former Deputy Attorney General and Minister for Justice and former MP Timpani. Thank you so much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. Maybe I'll start from the studio. How are you all doing?
By God's grace.
You're welcome.
We are blessed by grace.
We thank God. Also on Zoom, maybe I'll test the microphones and be sure that we are all set. Welcome, Professor Audrey Gajepo.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Good morning to everybody on Zoom, listeners. Good morning to people in the studio. I'm happy to be on this show.
We're happy to have you as well. Sheikh Arimiya Shaibu, everything okay with you?
Good morning.
Okay, we'll try again. And
people in the studio. I'm happy to be
okay, Sheikh, we'll have to rectify that. And then Professor Bokping, good morning. I'm sure you can hear us.
I can hear you.
Great.
Yes.
We're all set now.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Okay.
Good morning to our cherished listeners and co-panelists in studio and online. Good morning, Prof.
Yeah, Prof, good morning.
Okay, so with the exchange of pleasantries out of the way, maybe I'll just chip in a few ground rules. We'll have this conversation seeking to educate first and foremost, and then dispel every uncertainties when it comes to this particular bill, and we'll strive not to personalize this issue at all. I'll start with you, Professor Audrey-Gajepo. It's been a number of days since the passage of this particular bill. I'd like to find out if you, and by you I mean together with all the 18 civil society organizations, have you had a copy of this particular bill as amended and gone through it and satisfied with or cured all the uncertainties that we had after the passage?
Thank you, Emefa. No, in fact, as of yesterday, we had made representation through our representative in Parliament, the person who liaises with Parliament, and it is our understanding that the bill is being cleaned up, which sounded a bit curious to us. So we haven't seen the final version of the bill. What we have is the latest version of the bill before it was passed. So, and we are unclear, and I don't even think that in the discussions on the floor of Parliament, when it was said that there have been further amendments on the day it was passed. We don't know what those amendments are because they haven't been transparent. However, I don't think it's about amendments to a bill. I think that our position is that fundamentally this bill is flawed and unconstitutional.
Okay, well, in spite of...
And with time, we can explain why.
Definitely, we'll get into it. And thankfully, Sam George, one of the key proponents of this particular bill, is in the studios and will tell us when they mean cleaning up, what exactly it is that they're cleaning up. But really, the question or the key question to the civil society organizations are that what exactly are you afraid of, Professor Audrey-Gajepo?
It's not being afraid of for ourselves. It's being afraid of for the implications of the bill for our democracy. Because we are saying that the bill is against constitutional provisions that we do not discriminate on the basis of a lot of issues, including gender. We are saying that the fact that the majority of Ghanaians may want something does not mean that they have to be given that if it goes against the prime document of the land, which is the Constitution. Every bill must conform to the Constitution and to constitutional provisions. And we are arguing that having gone through all the clauses of the bill, we think fundamentally it does not conform to constitutional provisions, because the Constitution protects us from discrimination. And the Constitution doesn't say that we will protect you if you are only heterosexual. The Constitution says we will protect all Ghanaians against discrimination. That is one. And we can even go further into that. Two, and I think that the Commissioner for Civil Rights and Administrative Justice articulated it quite clearly yesterday in the media, is that you can't use principles of cultural values to enact laws in this country. This is the Commissioner for Human Rights and Administrative Justice. And so on those bases, we just have problems with the bill.
So it's your understanding that this particular law is based on the principles of cultural values. Well, we have lawyers in the studios as well, so we'll get to delve deeper into that. But let me bring in Sheikh Karimi Al-Shaibu. Interestingly, I haven't heard your immediate reaction and that of the Sheikh, the Chief Imam, I should say, since the passage of this particular bill. Really, your initial reaction, at least you were pushing for this to be passed. He must be a happy man today, is he?
I mean, definitely, and I can say without any equivocation that the Chief Imam is gleefully joyful about the passing of this bill, because he has been fully briefed about what we are going to do respect to
the evolvement of this LGBT phenomenon in our country and the attempt to really universalize it and make it something normal and something acceptable in our, and somebody who is the leader of the Muslims in this country, he could not actually give any support to such matter to be allowed, because for us it's a moral issue. It's something that also it goes to the very heart of the protection of the family which in the Muslim understanding of things is the property of God. It is the smallest unit of society into which every single human being is born. A family, to form the family, you need a man and a woman to come together. They give birth to children. And so the progeny and generations that are come are all formulated and all protected and nurtured within the context of family. So within the Islamic perspective, as for the chief imam, any practice that seeks to undermine the survival of the family must truly be condemned. For us, it is reprehensible, abominable, and objectionable. That is the point. So Chief Imam is so happy because he has already given his word to his right honorable Speaker of Parliament, Alban Babin, when he visited him in his house. He told him that he must use his leadership to ensure that this if you like, for want of the anti-gay bill must be passed. And through his words, and so we are happy, and great applause and commendation to the 275 members of Parliament. They have proven to us that beyond the politics, we can depend and rely on them to preserve the purity of our cultural and traditional values. And I think that my good friend George there, in spite of my disagreement with him on a number of issues, for this one, he receives my greatest commendation, and I think I cannot resist the desire to tell him in the face that, look, he has done well. I have listened to him at the level of UN, and he has remained consistent on how he feels about this matter. And his leadership in this matter is something that worth our applause. So, George, if you are listening to me, great job.
I can see how big his head is swollen too, but really, we'll get to him shortly on that. But how can the chief imam be a happy man when you've heard concerns raised about this particular bill or once passed or assented to, or this particular law violating the fundamental human rights of a certain group of people? I thought he was a father for all.
The issue we are dealing with, I think we need to contextualize this discussion very well. We are not talking about the human right of the violation of somebody's human right, but that we are talking about something that threatens the very survival of society. And any law, and laws are made for people. Democracy is human-centered. It is for the benefit and the survival of society that we enact democracy and our laws. So any law that is put in place, or any principle of democracy that undermines the very survival and purity of the family, it means it is injurious to the very survival of our society. That is why it should not be viewed as just a mere academic exercise. Indeed, it's not an academic issue. It is not a human rights issue, but it's about the survival. And so any law that is harmful to society, must really think together within our wisdom. And that is what also identifies us and distinguishes us from other nations. You can go to the UN declaration of their destiny, and you see how the issue of the family has so been emphasized. It's still been emphasized. And I think that as we go on, we can make reference to those provisions of the universal human rights issues that has to do with the family and the right and the responsibility of nations to protect their family and their family values.
Professor Godping, I know that apart from being a professor of finance and an economist, you are a man of God as well, a staunch Christian. But really, is it about what we believe? Is it about our cultural values or emotions? Some have said, at least, we are using these cultural values, emotions, amidst the hypocrisy to enact laws which violates human rights. Really, where do you stand when it comes to this?
Emefa, good morning. That's quite interesting. I've observed this space for a while now. Actually, from 2011 or so, from when President Mills was in power, he made a personal position on that. I've also followed that through to 2012, 2014, 2017, 2018, when government published the comprehensive sexuality policy. We, of course, unsettled Ghanaians to some extent when we say we're revising the educational curriculum, pre-tertiary, and all of that. You could see the interest that Ghanaians, it generated among Ghanaians and the rest of them. And I think that, and even if you look at it across Africa and the world, it wasn't lost on me that at some point in time, Ghana had to take a position as a country. And we could no longer be neutral along those discussions, given the dynamics that was emerging, especially other countries have responded quite swiftly and all of that. So for me, and I think that it's just the right thing that the country has done. And for, I'm not a lawyer, it's consistent with common sense, right? I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know how law is formulated. I'll put on my hat as an economist. In macroeconomic policy formulation, and even if you talk about fiscal policy of a country, it mirrors the country's culture as well. So context is important. So I can look at it from the perspective of policy formulation, macroeconomic policy, fiscal policy, monetary policy. You cannot disaggregate or hold constant culture, values, and all of that, even in formulation of tax policy and the rest of them. So I do not lean towards the idea that cultural values, moral values cannot be a basis. In fact, actually, it's a distinguishing feature of one society from the other, from one country to the other, and for purposes of contextualizing even theory, okay, and the rest of them, the issues of culture, values, and all of that all play a role. Then let's come to the substantive issue. Emefa, if you follow this discussion from day one, you will see that it has been one bill that has more or less united Ghanaians across different faiths, across different political divide. I'm saying this because in the last couple of years, if you look at bills that have been passed in Parliament, either with respect to tax or one thing or the other, you see the level of disagreement. You see probably majority will win with just one vote. Sometimes they have to even carry people on a stretcher just to show up the numbers. People who are even in ambulance waiting outside, who have to be counted as though they were inside and all of that. But for this particular bill, I get a sense that we have 275 or so MPs who felt that this was the direction the country needed to go. And therefore, they gave their blessing to it. Of
many
course,
will largely disagree with you. Many will largely disagree with you because of the path that this particular bill told. Because it looks like if you are not for it, then you'll be punished by your constituents because you can't speak against it. You have to, toe the line.
They are there to represent.
And that's the hypocrisy we talk about when it comes to this particular bill.
No, I don't think it is. I believe that in the process, there has been considerable space for dissenting views. Considerably. If you look at the process through Parliament, okay, submissions were elicited. People made submissions. Mm-hmm. They went to Parliament to defend their positions. I don't know. I don't know what yardstick we are using to say others are being suppressed or something, but I think that has been quite open. I'm not a cultural sociologist, but I'm yet to find a tribe, a culture, a practice, or within our traditional setting, not even talking about Christianity or Islam, maybe traditional belief that holds comfort for this kind of practices, that we can say that beyond faith, beyond Christianity or Islam, there is a residual constituency that perhaps leans towards this or has space for this as a country. I could be wrong, forgive me. As I said, I started with that caveat, right? So, and I believe that, and as a country, we have to take a decision and all of that. And my considered view is that Ghana has accommodating attitude towards people who show dissidence.
Okay.
And I believe that in all the discussions, Emefa, there have been considerable interventions that have been proposed to support people who probably are in that community. And I believe that the likes of Dr. Fo Amweni and the others are already implementing some interventions for people who need help. And I believe that the churches, including all our religious bodies, are willing to help, right? People who are in that particular community. And I don't think that any Ghanaian with proper understanding of this bill will just jump on the back of this and say, let's go lynch people who are in that space. I mean, God loves sinners. He hates sin. His position is that he doesn't want us to continue in that sinful position. Okay, and that is, I believe, the attitude that every Christian is adopting. That yes, this is not a practice we accommodate. We are willing to help. We are willing to support and all of that. So that. But
if you are willing to support and willing to help, and you are putting them in jail,
and that is different. No, that is different. Without corrective, punitive measures, society will not be organized in a certain way we think is consistent with common sense and proper way of life.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll come back to you on the issue because I know you're very passionate about the economy and also the reactions that are coming in. We've seen the IMF say they are watching this space in terms of the passage of this particular bill. We've seen the U.S. State Department statement on the impact, the likely impact it will have on our economy. We've heard from the U.S. ambassador. Really, the issues and the reactions have been pouring in. So I'll come to you again when we take the final round on this particular issue. But let me come to the studios because many of us are yet to really appreciate what exactly the changes were to the final bill that was passed on Wednesday. And thankfully, Sam George is with me in the studios, and so is Dimdiok Pemka. Like, he will cure most of the legal issues that have been raised so far. But Mr. George, thank you once again for joining us in the studios. Really, what were the final amendments, you say, for the purposes of education? Let's talk about the final amendments that were made to this particular bill before it was passed.
Well, let me say a very good morning to our viewers, to yourself, my brother Bemka, and to the rest of the panel online. Let me just state emphatically that the process has been extremely transparent, because one of the earlier speakers said the process has not been transparent. In fact, this has traveled 3 years in Parliament. We've had the longest public engagement. The gay lobby, the churches, the Muslim groups, traditional authorities have all had opportunity to make representation. In fact, this bill is what received the highest number of public memoranda, over 180. Nothing like this has ever happened in the history of Parliament. Now, we've had various iterations of the bill, and that's a standard. With every bill that comes to Parliament, as it goes through consideration stage, iterations happen. Now, on the day we passed the bill, that was Wednesday, I believe, the 28th, on the 28th of February, what happened was we had heard some commentary in the media, especially led by the gay lobby, saying that this was going to introduce criminal libel and gag the media.
Through the back door.
Clearly uninformed and not factual. However, because we were enforced in our belief that the provisions in the bill did not impose a cap or a gagging of the Chapter 12 rights of the media in the 1992 Constitution, I moved the motion on the floor to have another consideration of the bill, and introduced a phrase in Clause 10 and Clause 11 of the last but one iteration of the bill. Now, Clause 10 says prohibition of propaganda of, promotion of, and advocacy for activities prohibited under this act. And this is what has the gay lobby the most pained. And then 11 says prohibition of propaganda of, promotion of, and advocacy for activities directed at a child. Now, what we then did was to say that Before you, if you read 10.1, it says a person who, through a medium technological platform, and goes on and on and on and on. But what we then did was to introduce subject to the Constitution, subject to the provisions of the Constitution. That was the phrase.
But if you complete that, Sam George,
Yes.
it talks about broadcasts, disseminates,
Yes.
publishes or
Yes.
distributes
Yes.
or uses an electronic device,
Yes.
the internet service,
Yes.
a film or any other device capable of electronic storage or transmission to produce, procure, market, broadcast, disseminate, publish or distribute a material for purposes of promoting an activity prohibited under this act.
Yes, so once Parliament passes a law and says something is illegal, why don't you advocate and disseminate material on anti-money laundering? Because Parliament has passed a law that says that money laundering is criminal. So there's a difference between an editorial and advocacy. Your editorial, something always has something stake. He does an editorial. You can have an editorial on money laundering. In fact, a conversation on this platform on money laundering, which was an editorial piece by Samson, is what led me to pass comments that said that the real estate industry in Ghana is a tool for money laundering. You remember that incident between myself and Greta?
Yeah.
So it's different to do an editorial on the dangers of LGBTQ, of violence even against that community, extrajudicial violence against that community. You can very well do an editorial on that, but that your editorial policy and discretion, your Chapter 12 rights in the Constitution do not give you the power to then begin to advocate for it. And that's what the gay lobby is doing. The gay lobby is engaged in advocating for the acceptance of something that Parliament is passing a legislation to say is unconstitutional. So basically, we just introduced subject to the provisions of the Constitution so that it gives assurances double sure to the media that your rights to inform, and again, let's be clear, your Chapter 12 rights give you the power or the rights to inform, educate, and entertain, not to carry out advocacy for illegal activity. And so let's be clear on that. Now, I've heard the comments that say that, and the gay lobby is clear, it's not that they want amendments to the bill. They want the bill out. Now, the gay lobby is contradicting itself. Because I've heard persons even on this platform say that, oh, the bill is unnecessary because there are existing legislation that deal with all the issues that the bill is dealing with. You don't find those existing legislation offensive to the Constitution. But when we pick all of those provisions and aggregate them into one legislation, then it becomes offensive. What logic and what intelligence is that? That if you take the Children's Act of Ghana today, it prohibits anybody who is not a heterosexual from being allowed to adopt or foster a child. That is in the Children's Act. Now you put that provision in this law. The professors and the gay lobby have not found the Children's Act offensive to the Constitution. But as soon as you put it in the anti-LGBTQ bill, it becomes offensive to the Constitution. The Marriage Act of Ghana does not recognize a marriage consummated between a man or persons of the same sex. We put that in this bill. Boom, it becomes unconstitutional. Why? There is a new definition for unconstitutional. Again, we are told that the bill offends the Constitution. In all the conversation that is being made, everywhere, be it by the gay lobby, be it by the Strach boss, Joseph Vital, none of them point out what portion of the Constitution is being offended. What they do is quickly run to Article 17 of the Constitution and say that Article 17 says all persons shall be equal before the law. The first thing you are taught in law school is that you don't read the Constitution as a part, you read it as a whole. They read 17.1 but fail to go and read 17.4, which says nothing in this article, which is the 17, shall prevent Parliament. So despite it saying that all persons shall be equal before the law, it says nothing in Article 17 shall prevent Parliament from enacting laws that are reasonably necessary to provide for the implementation of policies and programs aimed at redressing, social, economic and educational imbalances in the Ghanaian society. This is a social issue. And so Parliament is within the same Article 17.4, exercising its rights that the Constitution has conferred on us to deal with the social issue. It says for the matters relating to adoption, which is in this bill, marriage in this bill, divorce, burial, devolution of property. But clearly, Parliament has not acted ultra virus the Constitution. So again, they don't know, or what they're saying doesn't hold water. And I'm happy for them to go. Then it is shocking to hear the Shraj boss and members of the gay lobby say that you cannot enact legislation on the basis of cultural imperatives. Why? Which law school did they attend? Respectfully. Have they read chapter 6 of the Constitution, the directive principles of state policy, and read article 39? Why? So, what is article 39 doing in the Constitution? Is article 39 in the Constitution just there for fancy sake? Article 39 says cultural objectives and imposes this as a directive principle of state policy. And it says that, subject to clause 2 of article 39, the state shall take steps to encourage the integration of appropriate customary values into the fabric of national life through formal and informal education and the conscious introduction of cultural dimensions to relevant aspects of national planning. So how the Shraj boss can make a comment of that nature, and it's being re-echoed by the gay lobby, shocks me, because the directive principles of state policy are a cardinal part of our Constitution. Again, let me go to the fundamental freedoms, the general freedoms in the Constitution. The general freedoms in the Constitution are established in Article 21. And I'm happy the former Deputy Attorney General is here. And he's noting. He's a senior lawyer who would be able to correct me or any other person on what the position of the law. When you read the Article 21, General Fundamental Freedoms, it expresses all the freedoms. Freedom of speech and expression, freedom of thought, conscience and belief, freedom to practice any religion, freedom of assembly, freedom of association, freedom of information, and freedom of movement. But then again, it goes to 21.4. And 21.4, he says, a person, he says, nothing in or done under the authority of a law, like what we are passing, shall be held to be inconsistent with or in contravention of this article, which is 21, which lists all the fundamental freedoms, to the extent that the law in question makes provision for in E, that which is reasonably required for the purpose of safeguarding the people of Ghana against the teaching or propagation of a doctrine which exhibits or encourages disrespect for the nationhood of Ghana, the national symbols and emblems, or incite hatreds against other members of the community, except so far as that provision, or as the case may be, the thing done under the authority of that law is shown not to be reasonably justifiable in terms of the spirit of this Constitution. So we are entreated, despite the general fundamental freedoms, to curtail those freedoms by an act of Parliament, insofar as it is reasonably possible to deal against people like the gay lobby who are teaching or propagating a doctrine that exhibits or encourages disrespect for the nationhood of Ghana. So, look, we are clear. And the last point I will make, Professor Bokwin makes that point. And Prof, you are 100% correct. You may not be an expert in traditions and culture, but by purpose of this bill, I have worked closely with the National House of Chiefs. In fact, the 4th public symposium, and that tells you how much work, for those who say we've not been transparent, we've held public engagements, apart from what Parliament did, as sponsors. The 4th one was sponsored by the National House of Chiefs in Kumasi at the Center for National Culture. And the president of the National House of Chiefs was present. We have over 80 languages in Ghana, over 150 ethnic groups in Ghana. Not one ethnic group accepts homosexuality as a cardinal part of that ethnic group, their culture or traditions. I challenge the gay lobby and anybody on this platform to show me one ethnic group that has embraced homosexuality. Again, I challenge them to show us any one of our 80 languages that has a word for homosexuality. In our local dialects, what is a foreign construct are described by phrases. So, for example, if you are speaking about Inchi, which is a very common language that a lot of people speak, if you're talking about the computer, because the computer is a later day addition to the etymology of the Akan language, it is described as abefu efidie. It is not a word, it's a description. When you talk about telephones, again, a new construct is called ahumatrofu. We describe them. Now, when it comes to homosexuality, how do we call it? Kojoa oye ne ho te se besia. We don't have a word for it. We have a description for it.
It brings me to that kind of description, and
Yes.
we'll get to whether we'll get an accent to it or not, and the concerns about the 18 civil society groups going to the Supreme Court, amongst others. Some key questions have come up. How are you going to prove that someone is gay or a lesbian, transgender, amongst others? Really, how are you going to prove that?
Emefa,
By just saying that I am the law, I fall foul of the law?
I'm grateful to you that you have now brought us to the real application of the law. And that's what the gay lobby should be applying their mind to. Look, everybody in this country has a right to a fair hearing before a competent court of jurisdiction. And if you read the law as it is, where it criminalizes the offenses, there is a burden of proof on the prosecution to adduce evidence before incontrovertible evidence of the committing of the offense. And that's why I've always said that Sam George and the sponsors of the bill don't care what goes on in the privacy of your bedroom. Emefa, do I know what went on in your bedroom?
No.
Do I know what went on in Pemka's bedroom? Do you know what went on in my bedroom or in Sheikh Arimeya's bedroom this morning? No. Or last night? No. Unless anybody comes out to state that this is what I have done, or brings evidence or produces evidence, you choose to go and record yourself. And that falls into the wrong hands. Recently, there was a video from a secondary school in Ghana that showed persons in the act. That in itself will form circumstantial evidence before a competent court of jurisdiction for recording.
The issue about the abuse of this particular act, or if it becomes law, is that by looking like I am female, but if I display tendencies of being a male,
it doesn't mean you're going to be sent to jail.
Okay.
It means that you will have
because you just mentioned the Kojo Besia issue.
Yes,
because we have people
you will
like
have your day in court. You'll be given an opportunity to defend yourself. Nobody is picking people off the streets or from their bedrooms and throwing them in Sawam.
Isn't that where the issue of violation of my human rights comes up? Because by looking like it, people would say that I am.
No, the person who makes the report, and that's why we have section 17 or clause 17 in the bill, which is duty to report, and section 17, which says duty to report and prohibition of extrajudicial treatment. So 17.1 says that a person who has knowledge that an offense is committed under this act shall report the commission of the offense to a police officer, or in the absence of a police officer, to a relevant authority of the community in which the offense is committed. 2 says a relevant authority to whom a report is made under subsection 1 shall within 3 days of the report ensure that the report is lodged at the nearest police station. And we've defined who a relevant authority is, traditional authority. Then this is where the catch is. 17.3. Section 84 to 87 of the Criminal Offences Act 1960, Act 29, shall apply to a person who commits a misdemeanor if that person verbally or physically abuses, assaults, or harasses a person accused of an offense under this act, or suffering from any gender or sexual identity challenge, including LGBTQ AP+, the stigma. So that's stigma. So clearly, this is the first time you have a legislation under which any person who is accused of an offense, of being a member of the gay community, can say to the police, I have been even verbal assault or physical assault. The person is subjected to sections 84 to 87 of the Criminal Offences Act, and you can be jailed for it.
Okay. Because
if you read it, for those there are jail terms assigned to it or a fine. So if people say that this law is discriminatory, they should just take their time, take away the emotions, and read, and let's be intellectual for once.
Okay, let me bring in Mr. Denjo Pemka. Really, considering that we have existing laws, but crime still exists, and you've heard Sam George go through the Criminal Offences Act, we have the Marriage Act, the Child Rights Act, amongst others. The Constitution also at least makes provision for all these crimes or the concerns that this particular act or bill seeks to remedy. The concern then is this particular bill consistent with the Constitution or the laws of this country, and is it that we are just basing it on the principles of cultural values and emotions?
Thank you, Emefa. Thanks to your cherished viewers. Thanks to your good self and my brother, with whom I'm well pleased. He's a very good brother of mine. And I've always thanked him. I have always told him that myself and my wife are grateful. And at that time when he had to travel all the way from Accra to Bolga to attend. So
he's a good brother.
He's a very good brother. I've listened to the advocacy for and against this bill as it is now being passed and awaiting presidential assent. But you see, there are some novel situations that I find in this particular bill that I commend it. And I'll come back to that. But you see, for example, if you look at the section 17 that he read, I have presided over and led my side of the House in discussions when I was Deputy Attorney General to pass several bills into law, with the kind permission and support of my boss at the time. We passed several bills, so some of them so controversial that for many years they gathered dust, they were never passed. We passed them into law between the period 2017 and 2020. We did not have things like these protective sections that we have under Section 17. So those who have the fears that people are going to be harassed, intimidated, beaten up, and etc., I think Section 17 is enough a cover-up for that. But you see, again, we don't exist as a nation in isolation. We exist among the Committee of Nations. And as a nation, we have some principles of jurisprudence that we espouse, the dualist principle and the monist principle. The dualist principle basically is talking about the fact that you have your domestic laws, and then you have international law that you have also domesticated. You know, you've signed up to international treaties and organizations, and so you become a part of the Committee of Nations, and so those laws have been domesticated by your parliament, and so you have an inclusion of the local and foreign law, which is the dualist state, and the strict monist state that rely only on law of the soil or your country without due regard to the international committee. Now, in our case, we have a mix of the two. A mix of the two because there are some of the international treaties and organizations and international commitments that we have made as a people that we have domesticated by legislation and etc. So those ones are separate and distinct from those that we have not committed ourselves internationally. So that's the beginning of this discussion that I want to look at. Again, if you look at what Parliament just did, I think that it is in line with a jurisprudence principle by one Jeremy Bentham, which is the utilitarian principle, that you take decisions that will bring happiness and joy to the greater majority of the people. And Parliament, the reflection that they had, the conversation they had, the discussion they had, the analysis and everything, point to the fact that what they have done will bring greater joy to the greater majority of Ghanaians. Now, it is not without regard to minority opinion anyway, because minority rights are also supposed to be protected. And that is why I again commend them to the skies about what they did specifically under Section 17 to protect, because otherwise we're going to have tomorrow morning people chasing and beating up others at market centers and other places, by the roadside, and etc. That fear that the majority of people had has been settled by the provisions under Section 17. Now, there's a particular question that has been raised time and again, and people have made very definite pronouncements, and I find those pronouncements too conclusive and unfortunate. You see, Emefa, the only court in Ghana that has the right to declare the constitutionality or otherwise of a law passed by the parliament of the country is the Supreme Court. So until the Supreme Court makes a definite pronouncement, whatever you say, those your beliefs, those things that you think are unconstitutional and etc., until it is definitely pronounced upon by the Supreme Court and give credence to what you are speculating, what you are saying remain in the realm of conjecture and personal opinion. And sometimes you may think that what you are saying is so simple an issue that when it gets to the Supreme Court, they will uphold your position. And the Supreme Court, by the purposive interpretation, which now is applicable in every case that they do, can interpret and apply the law in manners that will conform to societal norms. And so those who are concluding that the law in its current state and form is unconstitutional may get it wrong, because until the pronouncement is definitely made by the Supreme Court, we cannot come to that definite conclusion. Because the Supreme Court, when the matter is brought before it, there will be two sides of the coin. the arguments will be espoused, and the constitutional principles that each of them is seeking to actually say that have been infringed upon will be espoused, and it's for the Supreme Court to make a determination. Okay. And then from what the Venerable Sam Georges espoused this morning, when you look at that, I mean, he dealt with it decisively, but go back a little bit and look at Article 11, our sources of law as a country. You know, if you look at the sources of law, it includes customs or customary law as they are defined in each of the localities or societies of
And this addresses Mr. Whittle's concern.
Absolutely. So customary law is a part and parcel of us. So if we seek to legislate customary law, it is lawful to the extent that it does not infringe or impinge on any particular constitutional dictate or principle, clause, or whatever. So if you read Article 11 and you read 39 under the directive principles of state policy, as Sam George did, then you would come to the conclusion that, look, what we need to do really is to ensure that in enacting these laws that protect our values, we do not infringe a particular provision of the Constitution. And again, he got it right when he stated that you read the Constitution as a whole if you want to actually have a discussion that is holistic and come to certain conclusions that will be acceptable. You need to read the Constitution as a whole. Otherwise, what you do is that you may even go and read a clause of the Constitution, and your understanding of that clause alone is what you espouse. But when you read it and then read subsequent clauses and clauses that preceded that, it will give you a holistic understanding, and you'll be able to get the whole constitutional architecture and the reason behind it to be able to espouse it. Now, I'll soon zero in on this particular principle. As he indicated, in the directive principles of state policy, our Supreme Court has actually distinguished in a number of cases that we have certain portions of the directive principles of state policy that are justiciable, and other portions are also not justiciable. And they've been able to distinguish. If you read the CIBA case, the Council of Indigenous Business Association case, and the National Lotteries Authority case, and etc., the Supreme Court made pronouncements on the directive principles of state policy that on certain occasions they can be justiciable, and on other occasions they may not be justiciable, because the directive principles of state policy serve as a guide and an aspiration as a people that this is where we aspire to be at. You know, there are lofty ideals, you know, because if, for example, you look at it, the economic aspirations, etc., you realize that there has to be, economy has to be managed in such a way as to bring greater joy to the majority of the people and to reflect our customs. So clearly, if you look at the directive principles of state policy against the backdrop of Article 11 and 39, you realize that we need to, as a people, legislate as and when we need to be able to address increasing societal dynamics. And mind you, 30 years ago, the discussion we're having now may not have arisen at all.
Yeah.
You know, so it's as a result of evolution of time that certain things come up, that we begin to realize that a lacuna has been created, as a result of which we need to legislate to fill in that lacuna as time grows. If we fail to do that, then people can exploit that lacuna and create society in a manner that there will be chaos, which we will not want to actually happen. So laws are actually, if you read the memorandum to the bill, laws are made to fill in certain lacuna created as a result of time. So if you read the memorandum, it will come out very clearly that these practices that we are talking about, LGBTQ plus, I mean, they've even added so many of them, and I could see
that's where the plus comes.
I mean, there were circumstances of people marrying trees and all that, stones and etc., that we cannot allow to happen in our society because it is contrary to our norms and values. Yeah. That is what basically this law is seeking to say. That so if we go to the Supreme Court for a pronouncement, then the Supreme Court will have to look at the law as a whole and find out whether it's a fetter to freedom. Because remember that our Constitution has been couched in a manner that it principally protects the fundamental freedoms of our people without any doubt. And so anything that will be a fetter to that freedom will be looked at. But again, remember this, which does not appear to be coming from the majority of those who are also making the argument. Emefa, laws, human rights are not absolute. They are enjoyed within a certain context. There are caveats to every right that you have to enjoy. If you say that you have a freedom of movement, and you go into the market square and start swinging your arms around because you have a freedom of movement, as soon as your hand touches another person, your freedom is curtailed at that particular moment.
Okay.
So no freedom is absolute, or no right is absolute. So they are enjoyed within the context of societal norms, which we have to actually necessarily try to see how we can marry that within the context of our societal development. But let me state this. People are talking about the fact that unnatural carnal knowledge is an offense. That is true. But again, when we were doing the office of the Special Prosecutors Act, I recall that we had to go through the law and take certain portions of already existing legislation and consolidate them into the Office of Special Prosecutors Act. So we went into the Criminal Offences Act and took some. We went into the Procurement Act and took others. We went into quite a number of laws, and then we consolidated them.
Okay.
I also find in this bill that they try to go into certain aspects of the law that we already have in existence, and then they put them together in one legislation to actually guide us. That's what I find. So if we declare that the entire bill is unconstitutional, then it means those provisions that are already existing are also unconstitutional, and it will have far-reaching implications. Okay. You see, I know that we will come to look at implications for international community and etc.
And that's what I was coming to, whether the president should assent to this or not. We've heard Godfred Dame, at least before the bill was passed, make a general, pronouncement about the fact that he would not counsel the president to assent to a bill that infringes on the human rights of people.
I'm soon getting there. You see, so you look at the Constitution, when you are interpreting it, you look at the spirit and then you look at the letter. If you get the letter alone and you leave the spirit out, you get it wrong. Okay. So you have to look at the two. In other words, what is the essence of this particular legislation? And as I indicated to you, would we have enacted this legislation if we had moved time back 30 years ago? We would not have. So it is because of the evolution of time and the increasing need for us to enact laws to address challenges of our times that has brought about this particular law. And look, mind you, I think Sheikh Aremiao, my elder brother, when he was espousing his ideas and etc., he made very important points. You see, if we don't take care, under the guise of rights, we may get to a state where human beings will not even exist at all to enjoy those rights, if we don't take care. Because assuming without admitting that all of us without legislation buy into this idea of LGBTQ and we all get into the practice, and then myself and George become friends and marry, and then you get another female and marry, and another person gets. I'm just giving you a hypothetical situation. Then in the end, men have married men, women have married men. We curtail procreation. And at a point in time, there would no longer be humanity, because when all of us are dead and gone, nobody can produce because the combinations will not give rise to anything. And that is why in the bill, it is very clear that they have actually talked about the natural way of procreating.
So you would advise
your
the
sexual orientation
to assent to it? Maybe we should get to that.
The sexual orientation of any person is at birth. And that is what this law is seeking to actually espouse. That the sexual orientation of every person is what you are giving birth to. So I was born as a male and I remain Pemka. So if I decide to go through some artificial means of changing my gender and etc., it will be infringing on this law. Okay. It's a very complex mix. If you have stated that my brother Godfred Dame has come out to say that he will not advise the president to assent
before the bill was passed.
Before it was passed. After it was passed, I don't know whether you've heard.
You have heard from him. He says he has to see it and to advise. So the president has not received
the point that we have to make that is very clear is that it's a 275-member house, and I didn't hear any dissenting voice, at least when the question was put. So the assumption fundamentally is that all 275 MPs accepted that it becomes law. And that means that it represents the aspirations of our people, because the 275
Will the president assent to it, you would say?
That I will not be able to make a definite
Would you advise he assents to it?
Because I'm not in a position to advise the president now, because I'm not his attorney general.
If you were.
It is his attorney general.
You are in the position
I will say that for now, the circumstances of our times, I will say that for now, he needs to assent to it,
Okay.
due to the circumstances of the time.
Okay. Well, let me bring you in on this reactions that have come in. I was asking Professor Bokping, but I'll come to you, Professor Gadjekpo. So listening to the amendments and the corrections and the concerns that has been raised about invasion of privacy and violation of human rights and the sneaking in through the back door of the criminal libel law, and then also gagging, free speech, amongst others. Listening to Sam George on the clarity and the clarifications that he's giving you on this, you still will go to the Supreme Court once the president assents to it?
Are you talking to me?
Yes, I am, Professor Gadjekpo.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Let me say that there are a lot of issues that your other guests raised. And obviously, to everybody listening and watching, you realize that you've empaneled a panel where the majority, except me, are for the passing of the bill. So there's been a lot of issues raised to support their position. Okay. So you have to allow me, please, you have to allow me to counter some of those positions. But first, I need to raise the mischaracterization, even though I was not named by Mr. Sam George, when he said that it has been imputed on this program that there was no transparency. I was responding to your question, and it was in a very narrow context that we have not seen the final amendment that was introduced. So you can go and review the tapes, that's what I said. And so I will not be mischaracterized in that manner. Having said that, I can understand where religious people like Sheikh Ameya would, and the Imam would be happy that there's a bill that speaks to their religious convictions. But I cannot say it enough. We are a secular state. We are not a theocracy. So yes, we think that if we, and having or identifying yourself as same-sex attraction may be a sin, which we can all abhor, may be a cultural abomination to us, but it is not a crime. And we must make those distinctions. And that's why I'm saying that we need to subject it to the Supreme Court for constitutional interpretation.
Okay, but the clarity, if I may come in briefly, Professor Gadjekpo, at least we've heard from the lawyer on this panel, even though you say that the entire panel is anti or for the bill, we've come to establish, at least from what we've heard, if I could just finish, Professor, we've come to agree, at least we've come to understand that this particular bill is an amalgamation of the existing laws that we have, including the Constitution. So if we say that it's unconstitutional, where is that emanating from, you'd say?
Well, but I am not a lawyer, and that's why it would have been great to have a lawyer who is on the side or who is against the bill on your panel. Just as
really, I'm not sure.
On this panel.
I'm not sure the lawyer was speaking for
the bill.
For the law. Really, he was speaking the law and not against the bill, Prof.
My point.
Mm-hmm. We are educating, Prof. We are seeking to educate the public. I beg your pardon. We are seeking to educate the public on this particular bill. So I asked the lawyer to give us the position of the law. That's what I was asking.
Oh, okay, but Emefa, there are other lawyers, as you know, in law. People have different opinions. That's why law is my opinion against your opinion, and we need to keep that in mind. Mm-hmm. The fact that he's a lawyer doesn't mean that his position is necessarily correct.
Is it fact? Is it fact from what you've seen so far, Prof? Is it fact, Prof? If I could just ask, I'm allowing you so that we can move forward on this. Is it fact? Is it fact that the law that you've seen so far, the bill that you've seen so far, is an amalgamation of the laws, existing laws in this country? Have you seen that in that bill? It's question to you, Prof.
That. And like I said, I'm not a lawyer, but I am just saying that when we go to the Supreme Court, as we have, we would have taken our time, because right now what we've done is look at the clauses of the bill, and it suggests to us that there are a lot of provisions in that bill that infringe on our Constitution. Mr. Sam George talked, and it seemed very benign, about, and first of all, let me correct a misunderstanding. He talked about the criminal libel law being, there was an argument by, and his word was that the gay lobby. But it was the majority leader on the floor of the parliament, if you have your records right, who said that this was, in a sense, the provisions of the bill would be introducing criminal libel law. So let's not just glibly dismiss it as something that the gay lobby. Okay.
Yes, but from what I recall, if you would allow me to also give you some correction on this, at least from what I heard Afenyo Marking say in Parliament, it was the issue about incarceration, and that if we ought to want to help these persons, why jail them rather than give them community service? That's what I heard the majority leader say, unless you heard differently, ma'am.
Yes, that was only one of his points.
These reactions, the criminal libel law you talk about, is the reactions that have come in after the passage of the bill. And I can read some to you, if you may.
No, there are people who think it's introducing the criminal libel law. But I am saying that even Afenyo Marking made that comment. So if you don't have that, please go and look for it.
I will.
But let me just say that when Mr. Sam George talked about the fact that journalists can go about doing their work, let me read two, and unless they have amended it, section 12, I think it is, 2A, 2, a person who engages in or participates in an activity that promotes or supports A, sympathy for an act, okay, B, a change of opinion towards the act. Now, the very nature of fundamental freedoms of the media and free expression is that we ought to be able to express public opinions that we believe is part of the debate. How the former Deputy Attorney General talked about how, 30 years ago we wouldn't be having certain debates. Today we're having certain debates. And I said, even though he didn't quite, he was saying it in another context, I said, but that is a good principle to keep in mind, because we cannot preclude debate, because culture is not static, it's dynamic. We get new information that make us change positions. We're a country where there was a time when cultural values said that we should have trochosis, we should have female genital mutilation. We were still struggling with widowhood rights. We're still struggling with people that are witches and all of that. So we have cultural practices that are not always variable to us.
And laws have been introduced to cure these particular things that you talk about. Laws have been introduced.
Yes, this is my point. So you must allow society to continue to debate these things so that we get to positions where we can have laws that don't harm people.
Okay.
Do you understand? And it is my submission and it is our position that the law that is being advocated harms people. Now, let me ask you something. And again, the last speaker talked about the fact that human rights are not absolute. And he is right. Human rights are not absolute. But in what context are human rights not absolute? You have to ask yourself. The example he gave is that if you go to the market and you throw your hands around and you hit somebody. So you have to ask, when somebody identifies as a certain sexuality, who have they harmed? Where is the victim in this? Where is the victim? You have a nebulous victim that says society doesn't like that. And therefore, otherwise, we will be subjected to what the majority of our society likes. And sometimes society can be on the wrong side of history simply because they don't have the facts. Now, another thing is there seems to be overwhelming support, as people are saying, for the bill. But there was very little public education about the tenants, the specifics in that bill. Okay? There was there was a sense, and in fact, when we engaged journalists, almost no journalists had even read the bill. Yet, they were discussing the bill in public. Now, there are generalities that seem to people as common sense that you will protect people against homosexuals because it is a practice that we don't like. And even that one, the whole argument about that Mr. Sam George advances, and it seems very logical that, if you go into our history, because Kojo Besia is a coinage, it doesn't mean that we practice it. Look, I have heard people who were against the bill, but who have admitted that when you look into some of our cultural practices, there are homosexual cultural practices.
Like which one? Like which one of our cultural practices, if you could educate us? Which one of our cultural practices? Yes.
Of which cultures? Well, I was in a training and somebody told us that when you look in, and I just don't want to raise
we are educating the public and trying to cure some of the misconceptions around this particular law. So I'm only asking which one of our cultural practices.
There are practices in Ghana culture. There are practices
in Ghana culture, you say?
In Zima culture, yes.
Ghana and in Zima.
Which Ghana culture, there are practices in Zima culture. For example, that sociologists have documented. Plus, yes, and in anecdotal discussions that we've had with people, they say, yes, we recognize those practices. Okay, so we cannot glibly say that when you went around, nobody admitted to those cultural practices. Okay, so that's one, but it doesn't even really matter. It matters to us that there are provisions in the bill which have implications even not just for sexual minorities, but for all of us. So if you have a bill that says that you cannot have oral sex, you cannot have sex toys. Does it say only it applies
and that's
to
why I was asking if we have actually read the final bill on this, whether it's still in there, and because it was one of the things that had been put around or bandied around in public, but whether we're able to point it exactly to, because you were the one that's talking about people not reading it. But the final bill that was passed, Prof, I'm wondering, because we are educating at this point, really. So if we still put out what we knew back then, as against what has been passed, we are not educating the public.
Do you have the final bill?
I do have it. I do have it because you actually read, even the 12 that you read and what I have here, it was inconsistent with it, and I didn't want to point that out, really.
So which means they make amendments that we are not
exactly the point I'm making.
So can you read to me, or can you tell me that they've taken out the portions about sex toys and oral sex? Have they taken it out? Is that what you're telling me?
Sam George will briefly answer to that.
Well, and let me just read. Now it is clause 4 of the bill. And even like I said, and Prof, let me just explain to you and for our viewers why you don't have the final part of the bill. The drafting office, and this is standard practice, the former Deputy Attorney General is here. After amendments are done on the floor of the House, the drafting office goes back to incorporate all the amendments that have been done, and then the final one is what is then published and sent to the President. So this is standard practice. It is not as though anybody is being untransparent or not seeking to be transparent. Now, what we say in 4.3, and even with this one that I'm reading, has been amended again. But what it reads now is, for the purpose of this section, sexual intercourse occurs where a person penetrates the anus or mouth of another person of the same sex with the penis of that person or other device, or B, by use of an object or device, penetrates or stimulates the vagina or anus of another person of the same sex, or C, by use of the penis of the person or any other object or device, penetrates the anus, mouth, or vagina or another bodily opening of an animal, or D, allows penetration of the anus, mouth, vagina, or other bodily openings of that person by an animal for sexual gratification. It is clearly spelled out there. And in fact, let me give credit to who it is due. The Honorable Ostrich Mensa Bonsu, MP for Swami, former majority leader, at the time majority leader, was the one who introduced those amendments of person of the same sex. So it's all been dealt with.
Okay. Prof, you have to unmute, Prof. I can't hear you. You have to unmute. Good. I can hear you now. I can hear you now, please.
So thank you for that clarification and that amendment at the last minute of the bill. But it tells me that your bill is saying that if you are of the same sex, it's okay for you to have certain sexual practices, but if you are heterosexual, you shouldn't have it. You see, we have a law currently on our criminal statutes of unnatural carnal knowledge, which includes oral sex. Okay? So are you saying that when it comes to these practices, it's okay for heterosexuals to do that and not homosexuals to do that?
Okay.
I am asking you. One, but those are the issues that raise questions, larger questions about discrimination. How you formulate laws that says it's okay for one group and not the other. Okay. And that's why you said you took it out, and you just said, Honorable Chairman Sabos, you said take it out, make it only of the same sex. Okay. But coming back to the criminal libel issues, I am still saying that, and I will not criminal libel, but the issues about freedom of expression,
speech,
and of the media. Let me ask Mr. Sam George, if today, a year from now, Emefa Apawu decides that she's going to talk to people about how they've been affected by the bill, and she talks to people who tell her that the bill has been really terrible for our community. And by the way, there's been a lot of talk about protecting people from lynching, from insult, and all of that. And it is true that that's in the bill.
Yeah.
But the reality on the ground, even as we speak, Emefa, and you know it because you are in the media,
that's true.
Lots of reports about lynchings just for suspecting somebody may be of a different sexual orientation. Okay. It's happening randomly, and you know that. Okay. Now, we have to ask
Prof, you agree? I've given you a lot of time on this. Maybe we can wrap up briefly on that. Then I can.
How many of those people have been prosecuted by the law? We are saying that the very proposal of this bill unleashed a certain attack, an assault on people of sexual minorities. Okay. And the bill has continued to do that. And you may have a provision, but the damage is already done. Okay? So we are saying, and I am glad that and I will say it again, even though again Mr. Sam George seems to suggest that the Commissioner for Human Rights and Administration doesn't know his law. I'm sure he does. I'm sure that there are very competent lawyers in the Commission on Human Rights and Administrative Justice, and this has been well considered. I am saying that we will have the Supreme Court help us in determining whether many tenants in this bill, if not the bill itself, is unconstitutional.
Okay. Well, let me put out some of the reactions that have come in, pouring in just after that bill was passed. The UK, Right Honourable Andrew Mitchell MP, he says the UK is disappointed that Ghana's Parliament passed the Human Sexual Rights and Family Values Bill. If it becomes law, this will undermine freedoms for all Ghanaians. We encourage Ghana to protect human rights by upholding its constitutional and international obligations. This one from the US ambassador. I'm saddened because some of the smartest, most creative, most decent people I know are LGBTQ. The bill Parliament passed takes away not only their basic human rights, but those of all Ghanaians, because it undermines their constitutional rights to freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and freedom of the press. It will be bad for public order and public health. If enacted, it will also hurt Ghana's international reputation and Ghana's economy. Well, Matthew Miller, State Department, also says the Ghanaian Parliament Parliament's passage of a bill criminalizing members of the LGBTQI+ community imperils the rights of all its people, its international reputation, and its economic development. Ghana's laudable tradition of tolerance will be undermined if this bill becomes law. One, but a few of the reactions that have come in. And I was asking Prof about the economic impact, because I've seen that the IMF says they are also watching the terrain to see what exactly is happening after the passage of this particular bill, while we await the assent to it by the president. Professor Bokpin, maybe I'll give you a minute on this, and then I can hear Sheikh Arimia also on this. A minute each, then we can wrap up on this particular issue and go to Sona on this. Professor Bokpin, this is the economy you are passionate about, and this law or bill, we're told, will be injurious to our economy.
Well, thank you very much, Emefa. It hasn't been lost on us that there will be consequences. And I believe that as a country, we have considered that largely. Aid in the last 2.5 decades or so have already been declining. I mean, it's not a substitute. I want to believe that the IMF respects the sovereignty of our country, the people of Ghana, in their dealings with Ghana, and I'm not too sure that LGBTQ principles or dynamics are well embellished in their lending practices and all of that. I want to believe that the world has not rejected the oil from the Arab countries because they do not link to LGBTQ, nor the gold from Ghana or cocoa or something and all of that. I think that, yes, we can't say there won't be consequences. I want to believe that when our forefathers were contemplating independence, that we wanted to be on our own, they knew there would be consequences.
Okay.
They knew there would be consequences.
Okay.
I think what is important for us as a country, and this has long been recognized, that we cannot build our country totally on aid. Right, the best helping hand we can find as a country is at the end of our own arm. That is not to say we don't need the West. We need to coexist. We need to respect each other. In fact, it's in the best interest of all to recognize differences from country to country and the rest of them. The way Arab do things is different. The way the West they do things is different. The way Africa will do things is that diversity, recognition, and the idea of not imposing one's values, views as more superior than the other, I think is good for the coexistence and harmony of the world as a whole.
Prof,
but that said,
Prof, I'll have to come in on this, maybe briefly. Really, we're out of time on this one, Prof. Yes. Thank you. But Sheikh, let me bring in Sheikh. Professor Bokpin, please let me bring in Sheikh on this. We have to wrap up. Sheikh Arimia, is Ghana ready to bear the consequences of implementation of this particular bill regarding what could happen from the international system, from all that we've seen? A minute, please.
Yeah, I think that Ghana is blessed with all that it takes for us to be able to survive without necessarily depending on international aid. And I think what we need to do is to really manage our resources very well and confidently, like all other African countries. Let me quickly say that the fact that we are a secular country does not mean we are godless. Yes. The fact that we are not a theocracy doesn't mean we are godless. That is why our national anthem begins with God. God bless our homeland Ghana. We swear people into office on the basis of our belief in God. We say, so help me God. So largely, even though we have some group may not believe in God, but we are more than 90% people who believe in God. And our tradition also is grounded on our belief in God. And I think that we should all support this bill. And I want to encourage the president, if he's listening to me, on the basis of my understanding of the Chief Imam's position on this, the president should have the courage to accent to this.
Professor Gajapo, I'll give you 1 minute to finalize and wrap up on this for me. I started with you, and I would want to end with you on this particular discussion. Sam George is asking where I'm not coming to you on it. Prof.
Thank you very much, Emefa. I agree that now that Parliament has passed the bill, and before the president decides whether or not to sign it into law, that there is robust public education on each provision of the bill and its implications to Ghanaians as well as to our democracy. We have sat on this set and debated it from our own different positions. Of course, I differed with the majority on that panel, but I think that, and I hope that maybe even NCCE would be held. This is a bill that affects everybody.
Okay.
Mr. Sam George actually said that even though the bill says you can't have homosexual sex, you have to have the evidence. But people may be tempted to go and peep into people's bedrooms to get the evidence if they suspect. There are all kinds of dangers out there that will fragment our society. So I am just saying that having passed this bill, there's an onus on us to provide public education on each and every provision of the bill and what it means to the individual and to individual liberties and to larger liberties and to our democracy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Audrey Gajekpo. You also had Sheikh Karimi El Shaibu, and then also Professor Godfred Bopping. Professor Godfred Bopping will stay with me in the studios on this. The two gentlemen are pleading for 1 minute. When we come back, before we start the second discussion, maybe I'll give you a minute each on this. This is Newsfile, made possible by Bank of Africa. As strong as a group, as close as a partner. MTN, everywhere you go. Ashesi University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Robert & Sons Optical Services, your comprehensive eye care service provider for 33 plus years. My Way, dial *165# on MTN to join My Way today. Syntex tanks, it is strong, it is tough. Flamingo paint, simply superior. We'll take a quick break. Do stay with us.
The Office of the Attorney General, as a result, has saved the country over 10 trillion Ghana cedis. All the evidence is there.
Welcome back. This is Newsfile here on Joy News, on Joy 99.7 FM, and all our social media platforms, made possible by Bank of Africa, MTN, Ashesi University, Robert & Sons Optical Services, My Way, Syntex tanks, and Flamingo paint. And we get into the second thematic area for the show today, and we're talking about the State of the Nation address as put out by President Akufo-Addo in Parliament. And I'm sure my guests in the studio will not forgive me if I don't give them 30 seconds each to wrap up on the anti-LGBTQ. I said I wasn't going to say it's the anti-LGBTQ bill. It's a proper human sexual values and family values bill.
Even the long title has a
Okay, so briefly.
Yes, I mean, I've heard the comments made by the UK, is it the MP?
The UK MP and then the US ambassador. And
the UK MP sat in Parliament and they executed Brexit. Because 53% of British, just 53%, said they wanted Brexit. They respected the will of the people. The UK House of Commons is not dictated to by any foreign entity what they should do. The US ambassador in Ghana I mean, I've followed her career from Malawi. She's been always an advocate of LGBTQ rights, even in Malawi. And she's come to Ghana and doing the same thing. If she thinks that the most qualified people in Ghana are LGBTQ people, then I wonder which circle she's been working in. Because Emefa, you are one of Ghana's finest journalists. You are not an LGBTQ person. It would be an insult to the professionals of Ghana for her to suggest that the most qualified
if I were, you are making it difficult for me to come out and say.
Because I know you are not. Greetings to your everyone around you. I know you are not. But you see, the point we must make here, very simply, is that the U.S. ambassador must bear in mind Article 42 of the Vienna Convention on International and Diplomatic Relations. She's a guest of the government of Ghana. She must respect us. Can you imagine?
You've heard about the dualists we are.
Yes, but can you imagine?
As a nation,
no.
We are subscribed to it, so you should also remember
there is no international legislation or international treaty that imposes a right, a human right on anybody on the basis of the agenda of sexual preference.
Okay, you wrap up on that.
And the last one I'm going to talk about, the U.S. State Department, Matthew Miller. Why is he speaking from both sides of his mouth? 2 weeks ago, when people called on him to speak on Israel and his war in Gaza, he said it is not the business of the U.S. State Department to intervene in the business of sovereign states. Why? Is Ghana the 51st state of the U.S.? Ghana is a sovereign state. The Ghanaian ambassador to the US has not and cannot issue a statement condemning the US government for the assassination of blacks using American police or for the execution of a man using nitrogen gas
30
in
seconds
January this
over,
year.
Sam
And let me just state finally, the IMF and the World Bank. Listen, the IMF and the World Bank, on your own website, you say you are diversity-oriented and inclusive in your outlook. If you truly are, you would not be taking offense with Ghana. Because if you say you are diverse, it means you accept all shades of opinion.
Okay.
If you say you are inclusive, you accept all shades of opinion, heterosexual or homosexual.
Thank you.
If we say
Sandra.
we are heterosexual, you cannot punish us for that.
It's your turn. 30 seconds.
When I listen to those commentaries, Emefa, my conclusion is that the world is governed by might. And that is unfortunate. That because of the fact that, as traditionally my people will say, our hands are in their mouth. If we cough, they will bite. That's all that they're trying to do. As if we are not a sovereign state. Our very existence is contingent on what they do. That is because we have structured our economy to fall into their trap. Okay. And it's about time that we stood up to the challenges. And then with them all that, suffer the consequences, and our children will celebrate us tomorrow.
Okay, thank you so much for sticking to the time, unlike Sam George. Well, let's get into Sona now. And thankfully, I have Dr. Thieu Champong. He's an economist and political risk analyst joining us via Zoom. I must say I have Professor Godfred Bokping staying with me because there are some issues that I would want to touch base with him on. And also Kwame Sapong-Esiedu is a D&D fellow on public health at CDD Ghana. He's a pharmacist, member of the Royal Pharmaceutical Society of Great Britain, Pharmaceutical Society of Ghana, and the Institute of Pharmacy Management International. Mary Awilana Ada, Executive Director, Ghana Integrity Initiative, also my guest. We also have Ben Boache, is the Executive Director, Africa Center for Energy Policy. We're focusing on energy. And then Fentuo Tahiru Fentuo, Joy Sports, will be focusing on our quest to save Ghana football. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us here on Newsfile.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Once again.
Great. Thank you so much. I would start with, for obvious reasons, with Mary Awilana Ada. As a female, so my biases goes towards there. So I'll start with her. She's the Executive Director of the Ghana Integrity Initiative. And really, we're listening with rapt attention to the President, hoping to hear issues about corruption and how he's been able to deal with the issue of corruption. Is it just me, or did you hear him talk about it?
Thank you very much, Emefa. It's not just you. To our very disappointment, very, very disappointing indeed, the President went the route he has gone for the past few years. I believe if you look at the Sona for the past 3 or thereabout years, the President, either knowingly or unknowingly, have always decided to let corruption be in the back burner, meaning that it's not an issue for them at all. And for us in civil society, we believe that if you are talking about issues of governance in this country, and you neglect to speak to the issue of anti-corruption or the measures you are putting in place to fight corruption, then it means that you do not see it as a problem. Unfortunately, it is an ugly monster that keeps rearing its head. It is affecting this government. We hear of it on a weekly basis. And so for the President's final statement to this nation, it was our expectation that he would, as a matter of fact, concede to perhaps the not so effective fight against corruption. I say not so effective because if you pick their manifesto, they would have told you they wanted to put in place some measures, and they have done. However, when it comes to ensuring that those measures are working effectively, it has not happened. You have heard the lamentations of the special prosecutor. All the other anti-corruption institutions have had their turn to talk about the issues around lack of resources to prosecute the agenda. And so for us, it's curious why anyone would not want to talk about this, particularly when just in January we put out the CPI, which showed that Ghana has stagnated for the 4th year running, meaning we have not done anything at all since 2020 in our fight against corruption. And so for the president and his speechwriters to neglect that means they either wanted to downplay the role of the fight against corruption, or to say that they have done too much and the people of Ghana have evidence to that. Or perhaps when they downplay it, then people will not talk about it. But it's had, unfortunately, the reverse effect, because we have seen, and we are saying it as it is, that it's an unfortunate development, because the president knows that in this government, there have been so many issues of corruption and corruption-related offenses being committed. And there are some actually in court. So for the president to neglect that is a very interesting
but could it also not be, Madam Mariada, could it also not be that they may have done so much in that regard, and then also the fact that it's a daily issue that is being addressed all the time, it's in the public domain, such that they may not have put it in the president's speech? Could it also not be the case? Or is it your view that we haven't done much in that regard?
Certainly not acceptable for an issue like corruption, which affects the economy. It affects every facet of our economic life as a people.
Okay.
It is because of corruption we find ourselves where we are, and I'm very sure Prof. Bokpin would be talking about it. Even during COVID, when we were supposed to be each other's keeper, when we were supposed to ensure that we ran the economy very well, a lot of issues arose because of corruption in procurement, corruption of funds that were given to this nation by some specific individuals, which Parliament set up committees on, which the people of Ghana have spoken to, which members of government, I remember a DCE mentioning that monies were shared to them. This is a critical priority issue. And for the president and this government to believe that it wasn't a priority and should not be spoken about, it's very unfortunate.
Okay.
And we would want to let the people of Ghana know that this is not acceptable. We need to, if we really want to fight corruption, then for a Sona that is reflecting what this country is doing, what we have done, and the road we are charting, to neglect the fact that there is a fight to promote good governance and ensure that the effective and efficient institutions are being run, and that the executive is superintending over those very well. It was a very unfortunate development.
Okay, but one key issue that the president touched on, at least from the very beginning of his speech, was the issue about security. And I deliberately left out Professor Kwesi in my introduction because I have a bottle of red wine to give to him. Professor Kwesi is a security consultant. He will be focusing heavily on the security issues, and I'm told he's not on yet. So once he joins us, we'll take a look at that. But let's talk about the issue of the economy. Very big issue. And Professor Godfred Bokpin and Dr. Theo Champong are with me on it. Really, you heard Dr. Theo Champong, you heard the president at least take responsibility for everything, mentions that as the president and the executive, he takes the backstops with him on this. But really, let's take briefly your general overview of Sona when it comes to the issue about the economy.
Yes, good morning, and good morning to all the panelists. And I hope you can hear me.
Definitely can.
Great, wonderful. So there's a lot to unpack on the economy, but I think the constant here in terms of the defining feature is the fact that when the past government was leaving power, we were under an IMF program, and indeed, this current administration came to continue that. And as of this year, and also going into next year with the election, we will still be under an IMF program. And it's actually quite important because the government came into power promising economic stability, trying to turn things around and all of that. there have been some gains, and then there have been other areas that they've kind of struggled with going forward. But what stays or is constant in all of this equation really is that despite all of the rhetoric and despite all the things that we have said about, turning the economy around and sustaining, we still pretty much have, the IMF here with us. And there's still some structural issues that we haven't, fully addressed. So I look at the president's statement, and you look at the economic record, both on the macro and the micro. So on the macro, often there are a number of indicators that we use, from exchange rates to inflation to GDP to reserves to current account to public debt, and even at a sectoral level, you can take industry, agri, and all of that. You can take all those indicators and you can do an analysis of where we are or where we were 7 years ago and where we are now. And you can also do an analysis of where we are compared to last year. And if you look at what the president was saying, a lot of the baseline for his comparison was what happened last year, right? So for example, inflation now beginning to calm down and all of that. But if you actually extended that data point a little bit further back, you see that the story is a bit different, right, in that regard. And that's where I think, we need to have a much deeper debate about the real state of the economy, but also how people feel it in terms of their everyday lived experience and their pocket, going forward. So at the micro level, the president talked a bit about education and expanding free SHS, although there are still issues with equity. He didn't talk much for me about, poverty and living standards, which has actually become a big thing in the last, few years with the cost of living crisis. And I didn't hear him also talk enough about, galamsey, what has been happening. Again, you go back the last few years and there was a lot of rhetoric, and we had task force being set up, and you name it. But the issue still sort of persists in terms of the degradation of our environment. And then on the other social side, yes, he talked a bit about, in fact, he spent the first maybe 7 or so pages of the 32-page document on security. But I think what was pregnant for me in what he said and in the question that you asked really was the issue of constitutional and governance reforms. So on page 6, latter part, President says that there is definitely, and I'm quoting him here, much room for improvement in the workings of the executive arm of government, the judiciary, and our parliament. And there is no ambiguity where the buck stops when it comes to responsibility for what happens in government. It will be an unwise president that would pretend to have all the answers and refuse the advice of his officials. But the fact remains that the president holds, executive power, and that all of the cabinet, including the executive management team, the EMT that we've made a lot of noise about, all act in an advisory manner. I thought the president was being a little bit disingenuous here, if I'm being honest, in a sense that he was trying to sort of shield the vice president in a way, but also the fact that, yes, things have happened. And so, yes, ultimate responsibility lies with him because of the nature of the executive presidency that we practice. But the point for me is, if your people have advised, you've got advisors, you've got ministers, people who are experts, and they've proposed a particular course of action, and you decide to go against it, then that in a way tells us how imperial, right, the presidency almost has become, to the extent that we must push, and this is where I'm looking forward to the manifesto proposals that are going to come, the extent to which we can curtail some of these powers to ensure that the government and governance works for each and every one of us. Because at the end of the day, even for those of us as citizens or even in the civic space, what that statement from the president basically means is that you can talk, you can do advocacy, you can do whatever you want, but I can decide to go with it or not, depending on the particular interest that is at stake. And we've seen this from the ACA deal, we've seen this with a Japa, we've seen it with SML, and a whole range of other things where ordinarily, if you look at the evidence, it will tell you that we shouldn't have gotten ourselves in some of these deals and some of these transactions. So I'll just finish up with what a colleague of mine told me, earlier this week. He says that we have become a NATO nation, NATO, no action, talk only. And that fundamentally reflects this idea that you've got an imperial presidency, an imperial sort of executive that sometimes does not listen to the best of advice, because as the president says, the president holds the executive power and everybody under him, cabinet ministers, everybody just acts in an advisory manner. And that cannot be good for the country going forward.
Okay, well, Professor Godfrey, the issue also about the IMF, he touches on it. Some have said it's not all doom and gloom, at least from what the president puts out. 203 billion worth of bonds exchanged successfully, 5-month staff level agreements achieved, coupons paid as at 20th of February 2024, over 5 million cedis paid to domestic bondholders, even though we'll be hearing from some of them who say they are yet to receive their part, which he says is the largest payment in Ghana's history. He talks about completion of projects as well, amongst others. Really, it looks like it's not all doom and gloom. You've heard him. We may have stumbled, but we are rising again, aren't we?
Yes. Because this was the president last of this State of the Nation.
It's the last but one, we are told. At least there's one more to
last
go.
but one. Okay, so I was actually expecting a bit more, to be very honest with you. I was expecting a bit more because of also what the country is going through. The Ghanaians are going through a lot. And I can also see that it's weighing on the president, right? So if you look at the president in 2017, the president in 2018, and even the early part of 2019, wow. I mean, the posture, the assertiveness, the direction, the hope, you can see all of that is gone. It's gone. It looks as though the president has left already, right? And then probably it's like, can't wait for someone to take over or something. Yes, I think that for this one also, I do agree that the president was a bit lame on blaming external factors. We are coming home to reality, right? And I think that we should have accepted that much earlier. And then in fact, this was where we missed it, and I've said it time and again. Where the country decided to major on it, on pride, I would say pride, because the call was right for Ghana to reach out to the IMF in the third quarter of 2021. Because when we exited COVID-19 and also the election, Emefa, the fundamentals were quite clear, pointing to a certain direction. In fact, we didn't have to be an extraordinary person to come to the conclusion that Ghana was heading dangerously, and that with every month of delay, the vulnerability was just worsening. And so it wasn't difficult for some of us to say that the way we're going will certainly end up with the IMF in an ambulance. I believe that that was when leadership failed us. And we've had to pay dearly for that indecision, lack of proactiveness. And you could compare where Ghana was towards the second half of 2021 to the third quarter of 2021 to Kenya. Okay, the difference essentially, Emefa, is that Kenya proactively reached out to the IMF and got $3 billion by way of a support, extended credit facility, if Ghana had reached out to the fund much earlier, I don't think that the domestic debt exchange would have happened. It wouldn't have happened. Okay, and it was largely, and if you look at the discussion in Ghana here, it looks a bit some way for me. We won't go today, we won't go tomorrow, and all of that. Look, it was just pride, but that doesn't manage the economy. Okay, if you wanted to highlight that, then you should have started cutting down on government size and all those things way back from 2020. Okay, because you don't want to surrender your pride to the fund or something. But overall, I think that yes, we've made some progress. We cannot run away from that. In fact, it will be strange for all the resources that this government has had. And then if I bear in mind, no government in the history of Ghana has had the privilege of managing resource envelope that this government has had. With oil inflows, with gold price, numerous taxes here and there. I mean, come on. But if you look at what this government has presided over and what we have to show for, you can see largely inefficiency at play. And I believe that if we had been prudent and much more judicious and adopted a lean approach to managing, okay, the outcome would have been much more glorious than what it is here. I want to believe, and I still stand by that, Emefa, that this president in the first 2.5 years, really, you couldn't stop listening to the president. Okay, look, if you pick Free Senior High School, I mean, considerably, we felt that it was impossible to even start it at that scale. But it was done. Of course, there were challenges. Then there will always be challenges with such radical interventions. But the president stood by that promise. The Minister of Education did everything possible. We had tracks, we had this and all of that. That is also leadership. This is the way we are going. There are some aspects of it that we need to fix. Let's fix that going forward. But we can't take it away that that is an important turning point in terms of our educational outlook. That is leadership. Look, Emefa, the first 2 years of this president, in fact, how the Francophone countries, and we had colleagues in Côte d'Ivoire, Burkina Faso, and the others, in fact, they viewed Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, His Excellency, as the Osajifo of our time. Particularly when he boldly announced Ghana Beyond Aid in the presence of the President of France. With all that was happening within the Francophone countries, I don't know, somebody told me that it ended up from Osajifo to being maybe Ojijifo or something. I don't think so, that was how somebody like put it or something. But I believe that somewhere along the line, Emefa, our president lost it.
Okay. Professor Bakwe, let me tie in energy closely to this and take initial remarks also from Benjamin Boache, is the executive director of ASEP. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Really, you heard the president also talk about the fact that the sector, the energy sector, has been managed with discipline and expertise to avoid doom. So I'm told I don't have Ben Boache, but let me then go into health before I come to the studios and talk to my two friends in the studios with me. Well, Kwame Sapon-Esiedu, you've been monitoring on health. There wasn't much really, but we're hearing the good news about the La General Hospital, the construction and completion starting. We're waiting for the performance tracker, which will be launched in March. But generally, I'm sure you would zeroing in on health, but I'm sure you look at generally the Sona that you had. It painted the picture that you were expecting to be painted, you'd say?
Well, thanks, Emefa, and good morning to everybody. Yes, I heard the La General Hospital. It's going to be completed in 28 months. I have said about Sonas, if you listen since 1993, when Rawlings was the president, that it always has a particular track. The president comes to tell us what he thinks we want to hear. But as someone who always looks into health, I always try to tease out what the president didn't want to tell us. And that is what I'm going to look at. So let's look at something. Health is always tied to the economy because the health expenditure per capita, which is the amount of money spent on a person per year, has a direct correlation to the total government spend and GDP per capita. So what did the president tell us? He told us that in the first 3 quarters, Ghana was growing by about 2.8%, and that was better than the 1.5% that was predicted that our GDP would grow. What does that really mean? I'm no economist, but there's one thing I also know, that for countries that have seen significant development in their health sector, they've had to grow at a rate 3 times their population growth rate. So if you look at China, when they had to do it, they realized that their population growth rate was unacceptable. So they introduced the one-child policy, and they were growing at significantly about 10, 11%, sometimes 15% for about 2 decades. Ghana's population growth rate by the Statistical Service currently is 2.1%, which means if we've got to do it and improve significantly in health, we have to be growing at about 6.3 to 6.6%. But the president was happy when we are growing at 2.8%. What does that mean in reality? It means our health expenditure per capita, which has been dropping since 2021, is going to drop further, which means that the amount of money spent per person per year on health is going to drop, which then means that there will be no fiscal space for a number of the projects. So you heard the president talk about commissioning a number of projects like airports and giving timelines.
Yeah.
Did you hear him give any timeline for any Agenda 111 commissioning?
We are told most of them are 58%, 98% completion.
Yeah, but did he give a timeline? He was giving timelines to commission certain things this year before he goes. Can you give me a single timeline he gave for any Agenda 111 project? No. The answer is there's no fiscal space to complete those projects. But then what does that mean for you and me as Ghanaians? You see, your health expenditure per capita has 3 components. It has how much the government spends, how much the citizens spend out of pocket, and how much our development partners spend. Since 2021, the amount that the government spends per person per year has been dropping. As of last year, it was 31%. Citizens were spending about 52%. So you were paying more out of pocket even if you had NHIs. And the rest was from our development partners. With the current budget rate and what the president is saying at 2.8%, we are going to drop about 3 percentage points low. But who's going to pick the 3 percentage points? You and I. So the public component of our health expenditure per capita is going to go to about 55%. Meanwhile, your inflation is 23%. So your real spend as a Ghanaian has dropped. Ghana has one of the lowest outpatient per capita. That's the number of times any person sees a clinician per person per year of 1. In that one visit, the doctor has to get your diagnosis accurate. If you have to pay more for that one visit, people are not going to attend. And if they are not going to attend, it means they are going to be diagnosed late. If they are going to be diagnosed late, it means the health outcomes are going to be poorer. If it's going to be poorer, then what we see with a bulge in our midlife crisis where a lot of people are dying young, below our life expectancy, is going to increase. And so our life expectancy dropping from 64 to 63.8 years last year might drop further down, which has impacts on a lot of things, even on our states, pensions and all that. Because if you are retiring at 60, and 55% of all Ghanaians who retire at 60 are dead by their 65th birthday, are we going to restructure our pensions? Look, what the president told me in the State of the Nation address, after doing all the maths and doing all the correlation, made me very, very sad when it comes to health. And I'm not mincing my words. If anyone wants to do the debate, I'm more than happy to do it. We can look at the numbers critically. And I'm happy that you and Professor Bokping are on here because they are economists and they can do the numbers to a much finer detail than I can.
Yeah. And
they can speak to this more. But all I want to tell Ghanaians is the state of your health system, forget about there not being defibrillators here, what we call it, renal machines there and all that, is that based on what we've been told, you might have to take out a bit more money from your pocket to keep yourself alive. And worse still, the government has kept that cap on the NHIS funding in place. So your NHIS card may not do you the justice it needs to do, especially in an emergency. This is where I'd want to leave it.
Well, we've been running a series here at Joy News on the NHIS implementation, and it corroborates most of the things that you said when it comes to out-of-pocket payment when we go to the hospitals and to keep ourselves alive. And we've been putting out that, and it's all on our social media platforms as well. And I'll tie in energy, bring back energy, and I'm told Ben Mwache has joined us back via Zoom. And then we'll take a break on this, and then we'll talk about the passion of the nation before we would wrap up on this conversation when it comes to Sona. So Ben, thank you so much for joining us. If you can hear me. So I was asking earlier about the management of the energy sector. You heard the president. He says they've managed it with discipline and expertise and to avoid doom so. And the fact that they've made a lot of savings when it comes to that GOG team that was put together to audit some of the payments that were made to IPPs, amongst others. Generally, apart from the situations that we witnessed this week where the ECG has actually apologized for, amongst others, really, what's our state when it comes to energy?
Thank you very much, Emefa, and thanks for having me. And then good morning to friends and colleagues on the show. Yes, I heard the president, and I thought that, the state of the energy sector as we have it today, and if the president had the opportunity to brief us on what is actually happening in the energy sector, he could have done a lot more to give us a better perspective on where we are as a country. What we have now is not just a challenge with payment to IPPs, but a composite challenges that we do have in the energy sector with fuel supply, with generation systems, and the rest of it, and how much all of that crystallizes into a fiscal challenge for our country. And I think that is where I saw a deficit in the presentation. If you look at how much government is supposed to put up cumulatively every month, is about 250 million Ghana cedis to be able to offset the inefficiencies in the energy sector. And all these payments are being made by the people of Ghana. So what that simply means is that when power is generated, transmitted, and sent to the distribution company ECG, almost half of what they're supposed to recover cannot be recovered. And therefore, Ministry of Finance has to intervene on a monthly basis to the tune of about 250 million Ghana cedis. That is the state of the energy sector. So what that means is that the money that we need to be able to pay other commitments like roads, health infrastructure, education, is being used to pay electricity bills. I don't think that is a rosy situation that anybody should celebrate, that government pays that much. And even that paying has become a challenge because the money doesn't even exist for government to always respond to that commitment. And what we see going forward is that it's even going to be much more difficult for us to meet those payment obligations because of the fiscal challenges that we do have. And I was expecting some pragmatic actions to really deal with this problem, to make sure that ECG can live up to its responsibility and save the public payers from this leakage, from this waste that we are actually experiencing in our country, and cut down on the optics that, only Bryce Simon describes it better, that, people can just wake up and tell us anything, and they expect that that is it, we should consume it, sort of enchanting all of us to go along a certain communication line, rather than the actual truth and situation on the ground. And that is a big problem for all of us. We have people stealing power, and we don't have a solution to it, to be able to address the theft. And then you see the optics. ECG goes to stand before Parliament and say that I'm disconnecting Parliament. Even at one point, they were at Ministry of Finance to go and disconnect Ministry of Finance. When people are stealing power, but those you can actually account for, those you can see consuming the power, and then you can realize that in debt and chase them for the money. Those are the ones you are disconnecting and chasing them. And you look at the fact that the Ministry of Finance and government is paying up to 255 million Ghana cedis a month. You shouldn't even have the moral temerity to even go close to any government facility to want to disconnect.
Even
them.
if they are owing as much as 23 million, really, what are you saying? That if they are owing them, they should not go after them just because they can see the money? There are those they say that they cannot see. So the ones that they can see, shouldn't they go after them? 23 million was what Parliament was owing.
What you cannot see first. You have to prioritize your actions.
Okay.
You should go for what you cannot see. And forget about the optics for now, because government is even paying.
For you, it's all about the optics from what the ECG is doing. It's optics, you're saying? It's just for the optics?
That is what I'm seeing. That it is just the optics. They are not dealing with their own inefficiencies and their own lack of accountability to ensure that the power sector improves. And if you read even government reports, PRC's report on the cash waterfall mechanism, PRC consistently for the past 3 months have said that ECG is not complying with the cash waterfall mechanism, which is to ensure that everybody gets some money from what is collected. They decide to spend the money the way they want, rather than bringing the money into the pool for the money to be accounted for and shared according to a formula that has been approved. And PRC even says that the president himself directed that ECG should comply with the cash waterfall mechanism, and they have ignored the president. Right? And that is the state of the energy sector. And you look at their own spending inefficiencies. Let me give you some few examples where ECG in August 2023 tells the people of Ghana that their exchange rate was about 14 cedis to the dollar. And they bought $43 million from the banks at 13.95 to the dollar. That is equivalent to almost 80 million cedis of exchange loss. I don't think even Abuchis were charging $14 to the dollar in October 2023. All right. So this is the leakages that are engulfing the energy sector. And we expect that leadership deals with this problem and get people to be accountable and not siphon resources through these kinds of schemes.
Okay. Well, we are
not even learning that, recently they changed their billing systems and isolated it from the ECG corporate and gave it to a private sector. And that private sector is taking about 6% of all the revenues that are collected. And you look at ECG collecting upwards of about $1 billion every month. That is over 60 million cedis of our revenue going for just revenue collection. So you put those just exchange losses and the collection fee, you are in excess of 100 million Ghana cedis every month.
In all this, though,
sacrifices our budget to give to ECG to pay its bills.
Okay, but Ben, in all this, at least from the unstable power supply situation that we witnessed most part of last week, for instance, we've been hearing from the ECG boss offering that apology that many people were asking for and insisting that there was no need for a load shedding timetable because it was just a situation they had with Senate and that Dumso is not back. You deal directly, you have your ears on the ground, or your ears and eyes on the ground when it comes to the power situation and energy sector. What really is the situation? Is Dumso lurking around the corner? Are we facing a crisis that we are not being told about?
No, I think they were load shedding, and on Super Morning Show I gave, historical data on daily basis how much load we're shedding. And even in some instances we're supposed to shed as close as 630 megawatts a day, particularly during the peak period. So the deficit was too significant for anybody to have come to the public and even tell the public that we are not shedding load. There is no challenge with generation, all right? And they expect the public to just consume that and go on with their lives. We have challenge with generation. Okay. Demand is expanding, and therefore the gas that we use to generate the power is not enough. So we need to have some stocks of liquid fuel to be able to bring on plants that can actually convert or use dual fuels so that they can have access to liquid fuels to be able to generate power. We didn't have stocks of the liquid fuels to bring them on. At the same time, we had some power plants going on maintenance. TICO is not generating as much as it should. It's been down. We had Sun Power also going out. But we have plants that could have stepped in if we had fuel to generate power. So we had significant deficit that had to be accounted for. And the way to even manage it was to sacrifice the exports, all right? So we're exporting to Togo, Benin, Burkina, and GRICO has been cutting supply to those countries so that they can reduce the impact of the deficit. And even if you discount that, we still had close to 300 megawatts of loads that were being shared, which needed proper communication to let the people know that we don't have enough generation and therefore we're going to be taking out power. And we don't know how this is going to pan out in the coming days. If we don't get more gas from Nigeria, pay them on time for them to sustain supply, and also get some liquid fuel, this situation will persist for some time to come.
Okay, so your verdict is that the sector may not have been managed with discipline and expertise to avoid doom, so like the president mentioned.
No, I think the inefficiencies have been too graphic. Its impact on the budget. And we have done the analysis to show consistently, we've been talking about this, how much we spend in the energy sector. If you put the entire social sector together, roads, education, health, we are not spending anywhere close to how much we are spending to keep the light on. And that cannot be a disciplined management of the energy sector. It's been woeful, and I think the way to go is for us to address the problems and the challenges that we do have so that it doesn't persist and also drain the budget the way it is doing.
Okay. Well, Bemboache, thank you so much. It takes us to a quick break. We have still outstanding. We have security, we have sports, and the general discussion with my friends in the studios here on the State of the Nation address as put out by President Akufo-Addo. This is Newsfile. We're right back after the break. Please do stay. Thanks for staying with us here on Newsfile, made possible by Bank of Africa, MTN, Ashesi University, Robert and Sons Optical Services, My Way, Syntex Tanks, and Flamingo Paint. Let's talk about the passion of the nation. Recently, most of us were talking about LGBTQ, but really, football remains our passion as a nation, and it found space in the State of the Nation address after that fiasco at the just ended AFCON in Ivory Coast. And Fentuo Tahiru Fentuo will do justice to that for us here on Newsfile. And we heard the president. He talks about scouting, grooming, and developing talent at the districts and grassroots levels under a presidential policy on football to be unveiled as part of rescuing our football, and then also build regional and national juvenile teams for boys and girls. And GFA and the National Ministry of Youth and Sports will be collaborating on that. But really, Fentuo, thank you so much for joining us. Really, didn't we know about this scouting and grooming and developing talent? Is it a new thing such that we are going to put it under a presidential policy on football?
Thank you, Emefa. My opinion is that I don't think that it's absolutely needed at all. I think it is a redundant policy that will serve no purpose whatsoever. We have current structures that we have neglected and trying to create new ones. So if you take the development of football at grassroots level, for example, we've had a template that worked for us just a few years ago. You have a whole national sports college that was built in 1984 for this exact purpose, which was to groom and scout for talent at the district level, regional level, and bring all of them together at one school to continue to groom them. And that was not even just about only football alone. and I'm talking about the National Sports College in Winneba. Successive governments have left it to rot. It's now become a hostel facility for students at the University of Education Winneba campus. Some of the facilities are being rented out to private individuals, and everybody has turned a blind eye to that particular facility. But really, that was the purpose of that. So this regional, we still play inter-school sport at primary school level, at JSS level, at the secondary school level. And what used to happen and should be happening is this, that when you play the primary school, inter schools, you select the best players from all the regions and bring them to the National Sports College in Winneba, and they form the under-12 team. Then you play the JSS competition, you bring them, they form the under-15 team. Then the secondary school competition, you bring the best players to Winneba Sports College, and then they form the under-17 team. And it's a school, so they continue to go to school there, and then they continue to train. And this is not just football, because it has 8 tennis courts, it has badminton court, it has boxing gym, it has everything. We built that for that exact purpose. But everybody has completely neglected it and left it to rot, and now we want to create new things. And for me, that's probably the biggest issue with us and our approach to sports development. It's almost as if that we just keep creating new things and nobody actually cares about the existing infrastructure. And my opinion is that there is a lot of infrastructure that is capable of addressing maybe 80 to 90% of our problems. You take, for example, one of the things that the president mentioned. He said the government has constructed over 150 astroturfs across the country. Yeah. And he's right. Those astroturfs exist across the country, but it appears that the construction of those astroturfs was not born out of any clear-cut policy direction. It was almost as if it was a fever that caught up with many people and then spread like a pandemic. So then every MP basically wanted to have one in their constituency for many reasons other than football, because a lot of these now serve as social gathering grounds for funerals, for weddings. But the football itself, and recently, in fact, 2 days ago, Asamoah Gyan, who is on the
manifesto commenting,
exactly, on Twitter, to criticize the conversion of a lot of these community parks into astroturfs. And the reason he did that is because we have spoken about this a lot. Because these astroturfs that they've constructed are not meant for football, or they defeat the entire purpose of football development for 2 reasons. Reason number one is that 90% of these astroturfs built across the country are not football standard pitches. So you note that very few of them can actually host professional football. So it's a problem. So they exist, but we can't even use them to play football the way we want to. And then the reason number two, which is a really big reason, is that you notice that a lot of these astroturfs also do not meet the international standards for actually playing football. And they have been proven to cause injuries at a younger age, mostly because astroturfs that we have across the country are 2G, and these ones are not installed with shock absorbers. So then when you're stepping on the astroturfs, it's almost as if, you know, it's bad for your knees. So there is that as well. And for me, I think one of the things that we need to do going forward, we need to bring all of these things under a coordinated effort so that every single facility we are putting out is serving a purpose. One of the biggest dangers that we have right now, Emefa, is that in this country, we do not currently have a single sports stadium that is capable of hosting a Class A match when it comes to the Confederation of African Football or even FIFA. So the Babaya Sports Stadium, which has been hosting games recently, has had to go through a lot of compromise. So authorities have had to compromise a lot for that facility to host matches. So we have a big impending problem where in a couple of years, they will stop compromising if we don't actually go back to the drawing board.
The problem with football is not just on the field of play. It appears that all the ingredients needed
Yes, so basically the results that we have seen.
But is there hope? Is there hope really? I know maybe for the female team there is really hope, at least we've seen their performance. But really, when it comes to football at that level, when it comes to the Black Stars amongst others, should we still be putting our hearts in there? Is there really hope in salvaging the situation?
Of course, there's hope. Without hope, we basically will just give up on everything. There is hope, but I think that the president mentions he spent 11 paragraphs on sport, spent one of it on the Black Queens, and then the irony is that in that one paragraph he spent on the Black Queens, he spent it lamenting the lack of attention that the Black Queens have received.
And I was hoping he would give us a solution to that and say that on authority something is going to change.
Exactly, and you know, recently we've had to clamor for them to be paid their bonuses.
Yeah.
But I think that the structures exist. We just need to recommit into the sports at the grassroots level and do this one important thing: stop the over monetization of the senior national team. I think that is the root of our problems. We need to focus on grassroots development. And for me, I think the structures exist. We need to fix the Winneba Sports College and then start to get our players there as well. We've had good players come out of that system. The Essence, Lai Kinsing, Samuel Inkums, all of them came out of that system. It's been proven to work. We can make it work again.
Okay, thank you very much. That's Fentuo, Tahiru Fentuo, tackling the area of sports and the issues in particular when it comes to football. And they've been waiting their turn for a long time. Let me come to the studios, and Sam George and Dindiok Pemka are with me in the studios on this. So you heard at least the general, overview in terms of the reactions to the Sona. It appears they say the president has already left, and there was nothing. I will be reading some of the messages that have also come in as a result. Some of them say that they know the state of the nation already, and that's not what the president put out. That's not the picture that was painted. Really, tell us.
Well, I will prefer that whenever they say such things, they should mention specifically what the president said that was not true. Because you have to discuss everything within the context of what he said. If he indicated anything and you think that it's not true, then
so key, why was there no corruption? Why was there no mention of corruption?
I'm going to talk about that. You see, I'm going to address it. Principally, Emefa, corruption is not fought with rhetoric or statements alone. It is fought with actions and the legal regime. That is what corruption is, how corruption is fought. If you look at, I have stated this time and again, and I want to reiterate it, that it was during His Excellency's first term in office, from 2017 to 2020, that we enacted most of the anti-corruption laws that will actually strengthen our democratic dispensation. And so the implementation of these laws will take the fight against corruption to the heights that we actually desire and clamor. I refer you to the Right to Information Act. Prior to that, you know what was happening in our system. Many public institutions could engage in certain acts that were unconscionable and corrupt and etc. And then you could go asking for information. For a year or more, you will not be given anything, and you were stranded. You didn't know what to do. Today, we have the Right to Information Act in place. And then, even recently as last week, the Information Commission had to fine a state institution, I don't remember precisely, a state institution for refusing to give information, and then ordered them to give the information to the entity that was looking for it. That's a very big step. The passage of the Right to Information is a very big step that cannot be glossed over when you are looking at the fight against corruption. Again, Emefa, let me refer you to this. And I heard my sister comment about the fact that His Excellency didn't talk about corruption. But let me refer you to this. I said it elsewhere, and I want to reiterate it here, that never in the history of our country have we experienced members of the ruling government being prosecuted in courts than it is being experienced now. Never, ever. And I want to challenge anybody.
As in, you're talking about the numbers, or it's never happened?
The numbers of people who are prosecuted who are members of the sitting government. And you can mention them in the Office of Special Prosecutor. They are without number. And probably, I'm saying probably, if we hadn't brought the Office of Special Prosecutor's Act into existence, most of those cases may not.
You've heard his lamentations, haven't you?
So if you look at
him, you've heard him lament on how difficult it is to execute or do his work under the circumstances.
It has never been rosy. And elsewhere in the world, it has never been rosy. In Ghana, it will not. To fight corruption, you can't fight it on a silver platter. You recall that the Venerable Amidu had to throw in the towel along the line and etc. And in the same way, he is also lamenting and etc. But the point is that I'm saying principally that today, as we speak, you find that the former PPA boss is being prosecuted. Again, you find that a former municipal chief executive nominee in Ashanti region is being prosecuted.
But if you've done so well in that sector, how is it that it did not find space in the President's State of the Nation address, which is the penultimate one?
You see, the point is that if you listen to all the things I'm talking about, I'm saying that if it was not found there in clear expression, that may have been an oversight on the part of the speech writers. But so much is being done about it. I'm saying that the fight against corruption cannot be won overnight. If I can continue itemizing them and listing them in their numbers, the number of cases that are currently being prosecuted, and those people are members of the ruling government, which in history we had not experienced much, except one or two that we have had. But because of the very reason for the enactment of the Office of Special Prosecutor, which was that the will by the Attorney General to prosecute one of his own, now we have this entity which is doing its work. It may face the difficulties, but eventually it is a marked improvement over the status quo.
What happened to the fight against illegal mining?
Again, the fight against illegal mining is one particular part that all of us, and I have been an advocate, I've been on this platform with many, advocating that we need to take the fight against illegal mining to the skies, because the way at which we were going, I even said that we're likely to commit mass suicide, because the activities we're engaged in and compromising with these illegal miners, polluting all our waters, we're going to come a day that we're not going to have even water to drink. And that we are getting very close to committing mass suicide. I've said this time and again, the president sent out...
Put his presidency on the line.
And we've repeated this, has now become a boring one to the ear, that the majority, 90% of the areas where we have Galamsey ongoing, the president lost all those seats in 2020. And it was because of the fight against Galamsey. Quite clearly, no other reason. Because if you look at most of Prestia, Uni Valley, you have a lot of the areas, NPP, New Patriotic Party, lost it because the fight against Galamsey was taken to another level by the president. Again, as we speak, it is still ongoing. The minister is still engaged in that with the military.
The fight is still on?
It is on. Perhaps we are not seeing the burning of excavators, which was the situation in the past. And that is because maybe there's a shift in the focus, and etc. But again, the time that is left for us to even discuss the issues in the State of the Nation's address, Emefa, to be very honest,
the time you have, you can still talk about it.
Compared to myself and my brother, because if I'm going to look at the various heads and do the discussion as I'm supposed to do, I will need not less than 30 minutes or so to be able to make any impact at all. Because if you look at the various heads, you just spoke to my younger brother, Fentu, but he also, and then my in-law, but my son-in-law. But he failed to state something, that under this government, a lot of sports infrastructure have been constructed than any other government in history. He failed to acknowledge that, and I thought he should have done so before making his conclusions and then other analysis that he did. Because if you look at currently, the Lagos Sports Stadium is ready, and then the Boteman state-of-the-art facility is ready. And in all the 10 traditional regions, we have stadia ongoing, at least some of them youth centers constructed and completed. Others are at various stages of completion, and etc.
And some of them also existing abandoned.
Some astrosteps that have actually been constructed and completed. Some of them, he also failed to acknowledge that some of them are standard. Some are not, others are. He also failed to acknowledge that. So, I mean, it is public knowledge, and I want to challenge anybody to tell me any government since independence that has constructed more sports infrastructure than the current government. There's none. Again, if you look at education, I mean, we've spoken about the free senior high in the midst of the difficulties. Has not been abandoned. It's actually been expanded, and many more children are enjoying and benefiting. Again, in the midst of all the economic difficulties, payment of allowances to nurses and teacher trainees have not been withdrawn. It is still ongoing. Health insurance is ongoing, and payments are even more effective.
And people are paying out of pocket.
I've told you about our series. Also heard service providers, holding press conferences and saying they are not being paid as it used to be. It is even now improved.
Because most of them are being victimized when they go out to speak about it.
Even in the midst of the economic difficulties and all that. So the education sector, they may be challenging. Look at the STEM schools, about 10 of them, very beautiful schools. That could, if you want to construct E-blocks, they could construct hundreds of them, and etc. So there is, look, it is an act of pretense for somebody to sit down and say that everything is rosy.
Okay.
It will be a huge act of self-deception to say that everything is rosy in this country. It is not. But we are moving gradually and going towards that land we are clamoring for ourselves. And you realize that Professor Bokwin stated it, even in his submission, about the fact that the president compared the previous year or two to the current year and then said that there's an improvement. It is true. If inflation was at 54 and we brought it down to 23, that is certainly commendable. And even targets that we set
as
for
a comparison of your own record to your own record.
No, yeah, of course. But it is an improvement. If you can bring it down from 54, and you know that the circumstances that spiral that the whole thing to that level, that is the 54. Okay. The circumstances where most of them were, factors that were out of our control and jurisdiction. And we've been able to manage to bring it down. Even if you look at the targets that we have for GDP growth and etc., we've had to revise and all that. We've gone beyond some of the targets that we are supposed to have set for ourselves and etc. Those are commendable. Again, I say this and I add the caveat that everything is not rosy. The difficulties are there. People's pockets are not as they would have expected and etc. But we have made tremendous progress. And the president stated it in the State of the Nation's
Okay, let me bring in some George. Then we can wrap up on the State of the Nation. Really, the president mentions that definitely there's been some stumbling at some point. It's not all doom and gloom, and paints the picture in terms of our State of the Nation.
Emefa, thank you. Finally, I get a chance. But before I proceed, let me just use this opportunity as a son of the Gan state, Gandangme boy, son of the land, to state emphatically that the comments made by Professor Odrigajepo that there are Gan cultures or traditions that support homosexuality are not just false, but very, very derogatory. And the Gan state takes strong exception to those. If she doesn't have evidence, she should be very careful the things she says about the Gan state. Now, onto the State of the Nation's address. It's important to state that the president clearly is lost and at sea when it comes to the State of the Nation. He doesn't understand what's going on. He's checked out as president of the country. And like was rightly stated in Parliament, you have a driver Banza and a mate who is interested in chopping chobo. Driver Banza, Wekun Former, he's actually killed Ghanaians. Over 19 Ghanaians lost their lives at the renal unit of Kolibu simply because we could not pay 4 million Ghana cedis. And this was at the time that we had paid $2 million, which is equivalent at today's exchange rate of 26 million Ghana cedis for a phantom project called the Sky Train. This is also at the same time we spent $12 million on Ejapa when there was actually nothing to be benefited by the Ghanaian state. This is also at a time where we've lost $2 billion thanks to the PDS scam. Meanwhile, we are cupping handbag in the IMF for just about 1.3 billion. When the president says that the La General Hospital is going to be completed in 28 months, yes, he said, this is the same president who on the 17th of August 2021, in commissioning the Agenda 111 hospitals, said they will be completed in 12 months. This is the same president who made a commitment through his finance minister that will be commissioning the National Cathedral on the 6th of March 2024. The 6th of March is in 4 days' time. So, Emefa, let me, on behalf of His Excellency, invite you and Pemka next week, Wednesday, for us to commission the National Cathedral on the 6th of March.
Mischief detectors.
The president, there's no mischief, I'm just quoting the president. The president went to visit victims of the Akosombo Dam spillage and told them that he has not minded them because they don't vote for him. And people said, it was a state.
It didn't say so.
It was a state.
That was not how. That was not how the president put it.
However, he said that was the import. Was that not the import? He said they don't vote for him.
No.
Yes or no? Did he say they don't vote for him?
No.
Yes. Emefa. People said, his spokesperson came and said, we are misconstruing it. No. When he came to do the State of the Nation's address, the biggest disaster in the past year since he came to Ghanaians is the floods in the Volta Basin floods. When the explosion happened at Apiase, he mentioned it in that year's State of the Nation address.
That I agree that my people needed some.
But he failed because he doesn't consider them worthy of mention.
No.
Look, let me tell you something. And one of these days, I would take my time to show how it is human negligence that led to the Volta Dam spillage because they knew. The engineers at VRA knew. I will give you dates and all of that, but that's a different conversation will come. But clearly the president does not regard, mind you, the president dispatched his mate, Aplanke Baumia, to go to Sierra Leone with $1 million of our taxpayers' money and relief items when there was flooding in Sierra Leone. Yet the president thinks that the people of the Volta Basin, this affected 13 constituencies, even people up north. The president did not speak about it. As for Galamsey, the president's party is the biggest purveyor and perpetrator of Galamsey. Persons in the NPP, national executives of the NPP, are the biggest purveyors of Galamsey. They are destroying our water bodies. How can he speak against his own party? You've forgotten what his party's first vice chairman, who is now a parliamentary candidate, said. Party here, Sika. They need money. How can he speak against it? Wait, let me even wait before I go to unemployment. Corruption. How would President Akufo-Addo speak about corruption? I have always stated that President Akufo-Addo and his government are the biggest beneficiaries of corruption and political corruption. You can't run away from it. Corruption has fought President Akufo-Addo, floored him on the ground, and is spitting on him on the ground. He cannot speak about corruption, and that's why the president was silent about corruption. Because from the presidency down to the district level, which is the lowest level of the centralized government system, is all saddled with corruption. You were kicked out of government because you refused to be part of the corrupt at the Attorney General's party.
I disclaim this. I'm not I know nothing about that.
The game, he and his former boss have been kicked out.
I know nothing
you
about
understand
that.
me? Let me tell you something. Let's call a spade a spade. The president
He's issued a disclaimer.
Oh, but why not? He's a parliamentary candidate for his party right now. Else they will come after him. But listen, the president and his government have worn corruption as a rope, and they are gleefully dancing in the faces of Ghanaians with it. If we want to talk about corruption and who is corrupt, the person the president appointed as his first special prosecutor said President Akufo-Addo is the mother serpent of corruption. The current special prosecutor is crying.
And that has been disputed.
He is crying and speaking about the fact that he's been impeded by elements of government.
He talks about the judiciary. He's raised concerns about judiciary, not elements in government.
Wait. He raised his issues about the judiciary, which exists, and also raised the fact that the same issues Martin, what's his name? The first one. Martin Amidu raised about funding for his office. And when he did, what did we not see? The president's boys at the Flagstaff House decided to come and attack him and say that he had ordered for a bulletproof vehicle. Yes or no? Am I lying?
Because they raised issues about luxury vehicles that he wanted.
That was the president's response to the claim that he is not funding the office that has been set up. On unemployment, Emefa, the president could not say a word on unemployment. When his mates,
but he talked about 1D1F, for instance. Wait, he talked about 1D1F on page 25 and the number of projects they've undertaken in that sector and the 170,000 jobs created.
Emefa, the president, his mates, who he has picked, who he says is the best presidential candidate the NPP has ever had, meaning Kufuor and he himself, do not even cut the mold. I don't know, maybe best in line or something. Maybe he could be right. But his mates said they had created 2.3 million jobs. Yet the president could not speak about unemployment. The president look, when the president spoke about numbers relative to jobs, he said 600,000 self-employed people had registered with SNIT. Again, a lie by the president. Because the Director General of SNIT the previous week had said 60,000 people. But before you mentioned 1D1F. When the president was talking about 1D1F and promising 1D1F, they said they were going to build factories in every community. In fact, Anthony Abayi-Fakabo told us that there will be dog meat factories in some constituencies. They had this chart with every district and the factory that will be created there. Today, when the president is thanking people for 1D1F, he is thanking Kasapreko. Kasapreko, which was there before he came, which was there.
His thanks to Kasapreko was on the after and going to Kenya. That was exactly why Kasapreko was thanked.
But Kasapreko is now 1D1F B5 is now 1D, 1F. NS Chemist and Co are all 1D, 1F. These are all factories that existed before them. But Emefa, let me show you what the figures say. In 2016, when President Mahama was handing over, President Mahama didn't make noise about 1D, 1F, even though we had supported over the setup of over 60 factories. Listen, in the industry sector in 2016, the economy grew by 4.3%. In 2023, the industry sector grew by negative 1.2%. In manufacturing, and in 2016, it grew by positive 7.9%. In 2023, it grew by negative 1.0%. When you come to the construction sector, in 2016, grew by positive 8.4%. In 2023, grew by negative 5%.
Why are you comparing only 2023 and 2020? That's disingenuous.
No.
Why are you picking
Sona
only
is 2023?
comparing with 2023?
The Sona speaks about 2023.
No, but that's
I am picking figures from the budget. The 2024 budget will give you 2024 figures. It gives you 2023 figures. And I'm picking the last budget figures in 2017, which gave the 2016 figures. So the two figures I am mentioning are figures given by
Why not talking about 2017, 18, and 19?
The then Minister for Finance, now Minister for Finance International. Kenneth Foriata, he gave us the figures in 2017 and 2024, and those are the figures I'm using. So it shows you that even when the president says macroeconomic indicators are looking forward, it's not true.
Okay.
Look, they say we should praise them that inflation has come down from 54%. But wait, who took it to 54%?
Okay. Well, let me take some messages. Let me take some messages. Wrap up.
Let me wrap up.
Messages.
In December 2022, our debt to GDP was 56%. In December 2016, our debt to GDP was 56%. In 2022, 103%. Now you are telling me that we should thank you because inflation has dropped from 54%.
Let's take some.
When we handed over
let's take messages. Let's take messages.
The only thing I agree with him on is that the time you've given us is not enough.
Well, let's do some messages that you've sent. Well, Dr. Kwame Asante sends us this one. Says we should ask Pemka whether he accepts the conspicuous omission of corruption from the Sona as normal, and he should not deceive himself into believing that the government is doing anything meaningful to win the fight against corruption. He should reconcile what he's saying now with figures from the Transparency International, and he will know that his government has simply lost the fight. We have this one also, says state of nothing address, Sona, Ghana state of hopelessness and despair. That starts a freak. Dauda the servant says Sona was full of lies and inaccuracies. Senor Joseph says emptiness, self-praise and another smart way of milking the state. Ops World, is there anyone that doesn't know that the state of the economy, okay, he shouldn't have even told us. He says everyone knows what the state is. T_Ness says he has already said unless a new government comes to rescue us. We all know that things are not going well as a country. Excellence Reign says the president failed to address Galamsey because most of the government officials engaged themselves in it. If we all remember, 500 excavators got missing and Professor Frimpong Boateng said the party needs money. Their own Ashanti regional chairman is also into Galamsey. And then Edrino Greatness says, of course, the talk and promises are just too much with no action. I think it's time for us to stop talking as a country and use action, because action, they say, speaks louder than words. And one from the Population Council Board says, your panelist hits the nail on the head. With a population growth rate of 2.1, development will continually elude us. And that's how we wrap up today's edition of Newsfile. I've been sitting in for Samson Ladia Yenene, who will be back shortly. I am Emefa Apawu. There's more when you log on to myjoyonline.com. I think we should say a happy birthday to Honorable Esibebwa. Today is his birthday. Well, happy birthday. And that's how we wrap up today's edition of Newsfile. There's more when you log on to myjoyonline.com. Have a good afternoon.